2020. Good morning. Welcome to the December 13th MTA Board meeting. I understand we have some public speakers. Do you know how many we have, Steve?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we have 20 public speakers signed up. I will remind our speakers that, as usual, we limit your comments. We welcome them, but we limit your comments to 2 minutes each so that we can hear everyone and so we can treat all of our speakers equitably and also deal with the other business before the board. Also remind you that your comments should be limited to items that are on the agenda for today's board meeting. When you get to the 90-second mark in your remarks, the little machine on your podium there should flash and remind you. Just to make sure that you are reminded, I will also interrupt you and let you know that you have a remaining half minute. Our first speaker is H.P. Schroer. He'll be followed by Omar Vera and then Julia Yepes. Mr. Schroer. Morning.
For the record, my name is H.P. Schroer. I live in Manhattan, and as you know, I'm a veteran of World War II. Today I speak in behalf of the younger veterans and their spouses. These men and women served and sacrificed for their country. Yet every day, including Veterans Day, they pay full fare. What I'm seeking for them is the same discount as offered to seniors. When I served, everyone in the country either had a direct family member or knew someone who was in service. Because of this service, the country was recognized and special considerations were given to veterans. Today, most people do not have a veteran as a family member or know younger veterans. They have become the silent minority. I hope the board recognize the injustice of not having a veterans discount, both from a moral obligation as well as a financial need. A little over 58,000 younger veterans, including spouses, would become eligible for a veterans discount. In terms of lost revenue, it would represent a little over
You have a half minute left, Mr. Schroer. Thanks.
1.03 of the total budget.
Thank you. Okay.
A veteran, as little as 2 cents dedicated from each fare, would not only pay for the veterans discount, but produce a surplus of $250 million. 2/3 of the American public and most politicians think service to country is worth at least 2 cents. What is the board's position? The public awaits your answer. Thank you and have a happy holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Schroer. Happy holidays to you. Omar Vera, Julia Yepes, then Liz Patrick. Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Morello, and good morning, MTA Board. Welcome to the final full board meeting of 2017. And let me just say, we've had a couple of bumps with the subway delays, like the massive subway delays that occur throughout the year, ever since Chairman Prendergast stepped down 11 months ago. But we can always improve. After all, we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the opening of the 2nd Avenue subway that was long awaited since the 1920s. And like I said, I believe phase 2 should be constructed as quick as possible. You know, finalize everything and move along with the roll. All right. I also welcome the incoming New York City Transit President, Andy Bifford, as I mentioned on Monday. I'm I'm looking forward to meeting him in January. And last but not least, I pretty much reiterate everything I said last month and on the Monday's meetings I appeared in, and as well as on the Safety Committee earlier this morning. And with that, I also support what H.P. Schroer said previously regarding like the veterans advocacy and all that. And with that, I'm off, and have a happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. Julia Yepes. By the way, if you prefer to have someone hand you a mic, Adrian can take care of that. Ms. Yepes, then Liz Patrick, and then Peter Del Debbio. Good morning.
Hello, my name is Julia Yepes, and I represent Disability Pride NYC, the people who put on the parade, Disability Parade. Also, Disabled in Action and Independence Care System. I'm just here to tell you of an incident I had in this insanity of keeping a person in a wheelchair safe in a bus. As you know, there's a lot of buses in the city that are older. Some of the straps do not work. They put them on the chairs and they either break or they get stuck. I was stuck in a bus after I implored the driver not to put the not to put these straps on because I have had problems with them before. They break chairs. Anyway, so he decided to mock me because I didn't want him to put the front ones. All you need is the back ones. When the bus steps on a brake, automatically the chair goes back. So you fall backward because you have to be in the middle. Anyway, but this time they got stuck on the front. As he was pushing and moving the chair very hard, and then the police came, we were stuck there for about an hour and a half to 2 hours.
I'm sorry, Ms. Yepes, I have to remind you, you have 30 seconds
Oh,
left.
I see. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, my chair now is broken. He broke the, not this one, this is a loaner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liz Patrick, then Peter Del Debbio, and Colin Wright. Good morning.
Hi, I'm Liz Patrick with the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association. I'm here today to speak about the new Memorial Sloan Kettering Outpatient Center currently under construction at 74th Street between York Avenue and the FDR Drive. When this facility opens in the spring of 2019, over 5,600 employees, patients, and visitors are expected to commute daily to this outpatient hospital. The MSK Environmental Impact Study projects that 1,335 daily patients will arrive by car, while 4,200 employees and visitors will rely largely on public transportation. With only 248 parking spaces planned for this facility, we should expect a significant increase in car traffic on York Avenue, worsening gridlock, and wreaking further havoc on our crosstown bus service reliability. We need the MTA bus and DOT to work together now to identify a range of strategies to mitigate the projected gridlock on York Avenue before this facility opens. The bus scheduling department must begin planning for the additional volume of MSK hospital employees who will likely utilize our already crowded crosstown buses, especially the M72 and 66. In response to our concerns, last week Daryl Irick led a group of senior MTA bus and DOT personnel on a walking tour of the York Avenue Hospital corridor and the MSK construction site.
Your 30-second reminder, Ms. Patrick.
To assess the scope and of the problem and to brainstorm solutions. While the new MSK Center doesn't open for 15 months, we must begin the planning process now to be ready for the onslaught of cars and commuters guaranteed to turn York Avenue into a parking lot if we don't take action. Unfortunately, MSK's design flaws have become our problem to solve. I hope that working together we can succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Del Debbio. Good morning. Then Colin Wright and Tabitha Decker on deck.
Good morning, Chairman Loda and the board. My name is Peter Del Debbio. I'm here representing the American Legion. Chairman Loda, the American Legion is the longest-serving veterans organization in the nation, and today we seek you to consider a free or reduced fare for all New York City veterans. I am here today representing the American Legion, Leonard H. Hawkins, Post 156, located on City Island. The MTA Board recognizes the commitment the military service members have made to our city, state, and nation. We hope this agency will grant eligible military personnel a free or discounted fare rate. The American Public Transportation Association, APTA, has determined there are several segments of the population who rely on public transit, and veterans are certainly one of them. So if they can be empowered with information and a free ride or a reduced rate, it is a definite positive. That was stated by Bryce D. Word, PACE, Chicago Transit. Our neighbors to the north, Albany, New York, operates the Capital District Transportation Authority, CDTA, and provides half-fare programs for veterans. The federal government, via the National Mass Transportation Act of 1974, requires that half-fare policy be in effect for seniors and people with disabilities. All veterans would like you to have you consider adding veterans to this benefit too. The CDTA considers...
30-second warning, Mr. Del Debbio.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Veterans who are honorably discharged, discharged service members qualifying for half-fare pricing on all CDTA fixed route services. To qualify for the benefit, veterans will be required to provide a DD-214 discharge paper, separation papers, or Veterans Health ID card, Veterans Identification card, or New York State license with the official veteran marking. If approved, a similar New York City ID card with official veteran marking may also be presented.
You have to conclude, Mr. Del Debbio.
Veteran fare would be picked up after providing supporting documentation. The veteran fare card will be picked up after providing supporting documentation at a location established by the MTA. Thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. Peter C. Del Debbio, Commander.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. We do have your correspondence.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Colin Wright, then Tabitha Decker, then Kate Slevin.
Good morning. I'm Colin Wright with Transit Center, and I'm here today to call on the board to create a genuine, comprehensive plan to dramatically expand subway station accessibility for all. In November, Chairman Loda promised a staff update on station elevator accessibility, but if this update is merely about the MTA's Key Station Initiative, then it will be backward-looking, not a plan for today or the future. There are only a handful of stations remaining to fulfill the early 90s era Key Station Initiative. That leaves 75% of stations without elevators for people in wheelchairs, the elderly, parents with strollers, and others who have trouble on crowded subway stairs. What stations will get elevators next? How many could be accessible by 2025? What's the long-range target? You can't say because you haven't developed a strategy for progress on station accessibility. It's appalling that Chairman Loda has dodged the issue by saying not every station can be re-engineered for elevators. Whether that's true or not, you have over 350 inaccessible stations. There's plenty to work with to implement sweeping change. That reasoning reveals a culture that treats accessibility as something that would be nice to have rather than as an absolute necessity. The rest of society, including the MTA's peer transit agencies, agreed to take on this issue 30 years ago. If you're ever going to realize broad station accessibility and elevator reliability, you need to create and commit to a long-range plan, one that can inform future capital programs, overhaul elevator maintenance and operations, and ensure capital programs are fully implemented.
30 seconds, Mr. Wright.
Riders who depend on elevators are speaking up because they're tired of waiting on the MTA to take this seriously. The MTA needs a plan to expand subway accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tabitha Decker, then Kate Slevin, then Mary Parison. Ms. Decker?
Good morning. I'm Tabitha Decker from Transit Center, here on behalf of the Bus Turnaround Campaign to reiterate our call for system-wide all-door boarding on local buses when the new fare payment system comes online. In light of New York City Controller Scott Stringer's report on the dismal state of New York City buses, our demand to turn the system around is especially significant and urgent. We ask that the MTA create a plan for all-door boarding on local buses during the first half of 2018 and implement that plan with the rollout of the new fare payment system. When the MetroCard was first introduced, it was little more than a plastic token. Bus-to-subway transfers, monthly and weekly fare cards came later, and that was thanks to outside pressure on the MTA. This time around, when the MetroCard is replaced, MTA leadership should put riders first from the start and should introduce system-wide improvements that modern fare payment systems make possible. As its use on select bus service has shown, all-door boarding saves riders time, it makes operators safer, and in the case of SBS, it has led to reduced fare evasion. At a time when bus performance continues to deteriorate and when riders are leaving the system at great numbers, all-door boarding is a proven strategy that we can use to turn the system around and attract riders back to the bus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kate Slevin, then Mary Parison, then Norbert Giese. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Kate Slevin, Vice President of State Programs and Advocacy at Regional Plan Association. I'm here today to talk about the L train closure and once again ask the MTA to seize this unique opportunity to create transformative change, providing lasting benefits both above and below ground. A bolder, more comprehensive approach would provide a new model for how to deliver much-needed upgrades to the subway system more quickly and cost-effectively. The time is short for the MTA to make changes before the capital budget for this project is finalized. Specifically, we continue to ask the MTA to do more to improve the stations that will be closed during the shutdown. This means new elevators at 3rd and 6th Avenues, improved circulation at Union Square, and track and terminal improvements at 8th Avenue that allow more service to run along the L train in the future. The full list of ideas is in a report we released yesterday. Using long-term shutdowns on larger segments of lines could save money in construction and bring more urgently needed improvements to the subway system at a faster pace. We applaud the news today that the MTA is taking this approach for the E and M lines this winter. The MTA also needs to work with the DOT to show New Yorkers what modern, reliable bus service can look like. For the L train shutdown, this means HOV restrictions on the East River bridges, prioritizing buses across the bridges and along 14th Street corridor, possibly with a center-running bus lane that extends most of 14th Street. With bus ridership rapidly declining, losing 100 million passengers over
30
the past
seconds,
8
Ms.
years,
Levin.
the agencies cannot move fast enough to restore faith in the bus system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Parison, Norbert Giese, and then Pasquale Cuomo.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy holidays, and I wish everyone a happy and healthy new year. My name is Mary Parison Lavelle. I'm the chair of Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. I've been coming here for the past year, and what I've heard this board's concern is about not having enough money, about wasteful spending. So you want to save money, I'm going to ask you that if this board is asked to approve an RFP to go out for bid for locomotives in a range of horsepower from 2,000 horsepower switcher locomotives to 2,500 or 2,800 line haul locomotives, please do not approve this, because such a broad range of horsepower means that the MTA, Long Island Railroad, doesn't know what it needs yet, and perhaps there may be a preferred vendor. The MTA, LIRR, has not yet substantiated its pursuit of Tier 4 line haul locomotives with specific tractive effort studies. Procurement methods that worked in the past are no guarantee of success in developing the Tier 4 market. Look what happened with Metrolink's unveiling of its EMD Tier 4 F-125 in California. This underscores the need for extensive due diligence. Technology is much more complex than it was 40 years ago, and the MTA's procurement process
You're
must
down to your last half minute, Ms. Parison.
by using scientific methods to calculate which of the available locomotives meet the requirements of freight operating services while minimizing emissions. So please see Cures' letter to President Foy on page 2 of your handout, which requests that the MTA use an RFP Phase 1 pre-qualification protocol for this purpose in this procurement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Norbert Giese. I know you've been here before. I hope we pronounced your name properly. I apologize if I did not.
Very good. Good morning. My name is Norbert Giese, and I'm a board member of the Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. Using an RFP Phase 1 pre-qualification protocol to determine locomotive specifications before going out to bid will ensure the MTA doesn't waste money. It's not too late for the MTA to avoid a mistake like that of the MPI Boise, Idaho procurement. In that procurement, the Transit Authority bought locomotives without first doing scientific studies to determine the required horsepower and the pollution impacts. That procurement has to be redone now because the work-trained locomotives that the Transit Authority bought are too high polluting to be used in the tunnels. The locomotives have oversized engines because MPI supplied 900-plus horsepower prime movers, where 675 brake horsepower engines were more than adequate for the application. How much public money is wasted because of lack of scientific procurement at the MTA? In the past, MTA has failed to conduct unbiased, accurate, and extensive due diligence from the onset and then make the right decisions up front before going out to bid. For this procurement, an RFP Phase 1 pre-qualification of freight locomotive suppliers avoids problems and waste. It should be transparent and based on tractive effort studies relevant to the requirements of the freight operating services on the railroad, including carload, car weights.
You have a half minute to wrap up, Mr. Giese.
Gradient and length of gradients. Primary weighting should be towards minimizing emissions and other costs by utilizing switcher locomotives. Fuel consumption differential is 25 to 35% more with line haul locomotives than with a switcher, which has a direct impact on operating costs and on pollution differential that adversely impacts our health of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giese. Pasquale Cuomo, David Capel, Jonathan Boev. Mr. Cuomo, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pasquale Cuomo, and I've been working with Mary Parison and Cures for the past 4 years. Want to save money? Consider that now the MTA Long Island Railroad has a freight fleet of ancient 1,500 horsepower switchers. Each new Tier 4, 14 to 1,600 brake horsepower switcher locomotive can pull at least 60% more cars. Tractive effort pulling capacity between a 4-axle Tier 4 switcher and a 4-axle Tier 4 line haul are identical if the same electronic control system is used in both models. The only difference in pulling capacity between the two models is locomotive weight, and they can be ballasted with the same weight. So pulling capacity can be identical. Long Island Railroad can replace 3 old switchers with 2 new switchers and minimize acquisition, maintenance, operating, and rebuild costs. You won't know how much you can minimize horsepower until you do the tractive effort studies. A Tier 4 line haul, 25 to 2,800 horsepower, costs $400,000 to $600,000 more to acquire than the Tier 4 14 to 1,600 switchers. During the 8-year rebuild cycle, the estimated cost of overhauling a line haul locomotive is $300,000 to $450,000 more than a switcher locomotive. Switchers qualify for VW Mitigation Trust funding too, which could save the MTA millions more. And please refer to Commissioner Sego's letter.
Time to wrap up, Mr. Cuomo.
Tier 4 switchers are capable of 65 plus miles per hour to serve as Long Island Railroad's emergency rescue locomotive vehicle. In your procurement calculus, we implored you to include the impact of your locomotives on the people who live with them for generations to come. New York and Atlantic Railway consistently reports that 40% of its track miles are in yard work, which takes place next to our homes 24/7. We need Tier 4 locomotives operating 24/7 for these 24 freight operations.
That's it, Mr. Cuomo.
All right, thank you very much.
Time's up. Thank you very much. Dave Capel, Jonathan Boev, Danny Pearlstein. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard. My name is Dave Capel. I'm Executive Director of the Right Track for Long Island Coalition. Planning for Third Track was born in 1949, and so was I. Here's my proof. The main line corridor would require a new track to sustain growth. The first track was laid in 1844, the second in 1890 when the population was 100,000. People rode to the station in a horse and buggy. 127 years later, With a population of 3 million, these two tracks hobble the busiest commuter railroad corridor in the country. A failed prior attempt to build third track erupted in vicious controversy and was scrapped. Third track became infamous as the third rail of Long Island politics. No one would touch it. In 2013, the Long Island Index issued a report showing the enormous benefits the project would bring to the region. Following the report, the Right Track Coalition was formed. We have 5,000 members representing business, labor, philanthropy, academia, elected officials, commuters, and ordinary citizens. Our members speak for over 2 million Long Islanders. Over the past 2 years of planning, thousands more have participated in public hearings and meetings, and the local communities that had fought it have all endorsed the project now before you. An enormous effort required to build this historic public consensus. 68 years after its conception,
You have 30 seconds to wrap up,
this is a
Mr.
project
Capel.
whose time has come. Should you fail to approve it, we will surely not see third track in our lifetimes, and the region will suffer the consequences. Please approve it so I can live to ride the third track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Capel. I'm sure you will. Jonathan Boev, Danny Pearlstein, Chris Jones. Mr. Boev.
Good morning. So our system is very fragile, and we, together with the direct connective service, allows a lot of connection and transfers. It runs basically a direct service, and it has disadvantages because track is shared, and although it's we try to provide more service to the residents of the area, but still we have more than 2 trains leaving Astoria and in other places in Queens and Bronx and Brooklyn. And it has the disadvantages are those that it causes small delays, and other roads are being delayed as well. Big delays like we had this March caused a snowball effect, and the entire division was shut down. Utilize budget inefficiently, and its overload tracks creates bottleneck delays, and also map is very sophisticated. I just want to show you. So this is a direct service. When we're utilizing one budget, we run 9 lines here. So when average wait time is 15 minutes, because our budget allows us to run one train every half an hour. So average wait time is 15 minutes, travel time is screwed up at 20 minutes, and total time of ride is 35 minutes. So as I said, we have a problem with the budget, and last time you approved additional trains to run, but it's cost a lot of money. So when we have a connective service and...
You have 30 seconds left. You may want to wrap up, Mr. Boev.
I got it.
Thank you.
When we have a connective service and allow more transfer and less truck sharing, we have a transit hub in the middle, and the train, the travel time to the transit hub is 10 minutes, and average wait time. Now we have same budget. Now over there we run 9 trains. Now we have only 3 trains. Budget allows us to run 3 times more trains here. So wait time is 5 minutes, average travel time 10 minutes, another wait 5 minutes, and travel time 10 minutes. Total 30 minutes. So
you have to finish right now.
Run more trains. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize. Danny Pearlstein, Chris Jones, William Henderson.
Good morning. I'm Danny Pearlstein, Policy Communications Director at the Riders Alliance. As you know, our transit system is in crisis. Delays, breakdowns, it's a problem decades in the making, and one of the most urgent that the state should address in the coming months. Governor Cuomo, who controls the MTA, claimed responsibility over the summer, and that's a vital step. Unfortunately, for the last month, he has again been trying to push accountability elsewhere, threatening to scale back the important subway action plan if the city doesn't pay what the governor wants. What's more, relitigating the settled question of who is responsible for fixing the subway is a waste of precious time. The subway action plan, strong as it is no substitute for a long-term plan to modernize the system, a plan destined to cost billions of dollars. Rather than pointing fingers, the governor should be laying out a credible plan to modernize the transit system and using his extensive political power to pass a real congestion pricing plan that would generate the necessary funding. Until then, riders will continue to be stuck on #Cuomo's MTA, and we will continue to know exactly who to blame for our misery underground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris Jones, William Henderson, Lisa Tyson. Morning, Mr. Jones.
Good morning. My name is Chris Jones, and I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Planner for Regional Plan Association. I'm here to express Regional Plan Association's strong support for a third track on the Long Island Railroad main line, and to urge the MTA Board to approve the contract to move this vital project forward. The economic and environmental benefits of this project are clear, and both Long Island and New York City will benefit. For Long Island, it will provide increased service and greater reliability to over 100,000 riders, and it is expected to add nearly $6 billion and 14,000 jobs to Long Island's economy. For New York City, it will provide employers with improved access to Long Island's workforce and give residents of Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan greater access to job opportunities in Nassau and Suffolk. It would also help update a transit system that has remained largely the same since it was constructed decades ago, allowing the Long Island Railroad to catch up with Metro North and New Jersey Transit. Over the last 20 years, Metro North and New Jersey Transit have made major improvements in new capacity. These projects, including the construction of a third track along Metro North's Harlem line, have allowed these systems to be more flexible and resilient, with better service for reverse commuters and off-peak travel. And as outlined in RPA's regional rail proposal in our recently released fourth regional plan, expanded capacity on Long Island Railroad's main line is essential to creating a fully integrated commuter rail network with through-running service between all parts of the New York region, drastically reduced travel times, and enough capacity to allow the region's economy to grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. William Henderson, Lisa Tyson, and then Matt Cohen. Morning.
Bill Henderson, Executive Director of the PCAC. For years, we've advocated MTA funding sources that are stable, reliable, and able to grow to meet system needs over time. We appreciate the work that's gone into this budget. While it contains a great deal of uncertainty, it appears to be self-sustaining within the accepted meaning of the term. We have serious concerns, however, about the long-term sustainability of the MTA and its agencies given existing and anticipated demands and funding. We're particularly troubled by the MTA's rising level of debt and the burden of fares on our riders. Our members recognize that this board has limited leverage with respect to its revenues and expenses. On the revenue side, the board can enhance revenue it derives from riders. We believe, if anything, you've done too much in this area, as the proportion of cost of service borne by riders is greater in this system than any other major system in the country. You can also adjust spending, which we learned from the experience of 2009 and 2010 could have long-lasting consequences. The remainder of the financial picture largely rests with what are euphemistically termed our funding partners. There are impending funding decisions to be made at the state and local level, and while elected officials must make these decisions, we believe that MTA management and this board must be heard with respect to the adequacy and reliability of proposed funding. We intend to make our voice heard, and we call on this board and MTA management to be candid and public in their assessment of the adequacy, suitability, and reliability of proposed funding. We need a mature discussion of these options, in which the MTA must participate. Not only must the MTA benefit as
you have to wrap up, Mr. Henderson.
Existing funding sources, new revenue sources must be structured to ensure that they continue to provide appropriate support for the long-term health of the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lisa Tyson, then Matt Cohen, and Julie Varagesi.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Tyson, Director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We are a multi-issue grassroots citizen-run organization. I'm here as part of the Right Track Coalition. We are members of it, and we are submitting 4,542 petitions signed by Long Island Railroad commuters who want the third track. This is a project of regional significance. We are one of the most mature suburbs. Our rail system has not met the need of our residents. We can grow even more. We could have smart growth, but we need the third track to do that. Long Island has a lot of young people. They need a place to go, and they need to have housing by a train station, transit-oriented development. We need to have a place for seniors to go as well. There's a lot of changing demographics, more low-income people, more people who want the non-traditional, like, single-family home with 10 cars in front of it. They want to live in a downtown. The expansion of this system will allow that and allow Long Island to grow. There's also safer grade crossings. And let me tell you, To get to this point of a vote yes on Long Island for the third track was huge. And the governor and the coalition and Long Island Association and unions, we all got together and we fought for a really good plan, and the community supported it. There is no reason for you to vote no today. We need you to vote yes and to move this project forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt Cohen, Julie Verghese, and Miriam Fisher. Morning.
Morning. Hi, I'm Matt Cohen from the Long Island Association, here to read a letter from Long Island Association President Kevin Law, Nassau County Executive-elect Laura Curran, and Suffolk County Executive Steve Ballone. Dear Chairman Loda, we understand the MTA Board is poised to approve the procurement selection of the contractors to construct the LIRR expansion project on December 13. This project will improve mass transit, reduce traffic congestion, protect the environment, and help the New York City and Long Island economies. While it is the single most important infrastructure to move forward on Long Island in decades, it will also benefit New York City residents and businesses alike. We have heard some board members might have concerns about this investment in the suburbs and that they would prefer the money stay in New York City. We cannot and should not pit region against region. The fact of the matter is that the New York City and Long Island economies are inextricably linked. Anything we can do to make it easier for New York residents to reverse commute to employment opportunities on Long Island, and for Long Island residents to commute into their jobs with New York City businesses strengthens both economies. Moreover, Long Islanders contribute significant resources to the state of New York and the MTA and are deserving of this investment in our region. In fact, Long Islanders contribute more than $15 billion to New York State each year, yet our region receives only $10 billion back from Albany each year. Thus, our balance of payment deficit is approximately $5 billion every year, which funds are used throughout the state, including for the MTA. Long Islanders also pay over $400 million in various MTA taxes and surcharges every year, including the payroll mobility tax and corporate surcharge. This is in addition to $2 billion per year.
You have a half minute to wrap up, Mr. Cohen. Thank you.
Commuters pay in user fees. The LI expansion project is the most important infrastructure project the MTA has ever proposed for Long Island. Notwithstanding all the economic development benefits this project will produce, given the billions of dollars Long Island contribute to the state MTA every year, Long Island is surely deserving of this capital project. Accordingly, we respectfully request the board approve the procurement selection recommendations and permit the Long Island expansion project to move forward. Sincerely, Laura Curran, Nassau County Executive-elect, Kevin Law, President LIA, and Steve Ballone, Suffolk County Executive. Thank you. I have copies of the letters.
Good. Thank you very much. Julie Verghese, then Miriam Fisher, and then I believe Jason Pinheiro.
Hi, my name is Julie Verghese, and I'm with the People's MTA. We'd like to address the MTA as a class issue, a race issue, and a disability rights issue. Thank you. It's a class issue because the MTA aids gentrification by building a subway line through the 2nd Avenue area on the Upper East Side, and in the meantime also considering a connector train between the gentrifying neighborhood in Queens and the soon-to-be gentrified neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Meanwhile, there are bus cuts in communities of color as well as working communities. And also, these meetings are held when most workers work, which is very inconvenient, and it doesn't consider those people, which is the majority of your riders. It's also a race issue. We demand an end to the racist policing in the subway system. The Community Service Society came out with a report that showed that the majority of turnstile arrests were actually of black and brown people, and were specifically where the police were stationed in subway stations in black areas, black neighborhoods in the city. And the NYPD's statistics from January to March also showed that the majority of arrests from earlier this year were for turnstile jumping, which is also called theft of service. I would say that the real theft of service is the fact that a lot of the money goes towards banks, towards the bank's debt service, rather than funding system upgrades.
You have a half minute to wrap up. I'm sorry.
There's also a disability rights issue. We need elevators in every subway station. It's just a shame that we don't have it. Only 20% of subway stations have elevators. Buses have been slashed by half, so that if there were 4 buses going through the hour at bus stops, now it's 2 buses going through the same stops. And I just wanted to note that we can talk about where the money comes, whether it's state money or city money, but the fact is that this whole country doesn't seem to have a problem with $700 billion going towards war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Miriam Fisher, and then Jason Pinero, and then Mary Kessinger. Good morning.
I'm Miriam Fisher, a subway rider, a former employee of International Center for the Disabled, and somebody with a bad back and a bad knee, and a longtime advocate for public transportation and mass transit. I wanted to expand some of the dialogue and put on the radar issues related to accessibility. We've been told that not all stations can be retrofitted with elevators, but I haven't heard much discussion of escalators and ramps. I propose a study to investigate which stations can accommodate escalators and ramps, such as the ramp on Union Square, the winding ramp, which would accommodate not everyone, but a wider range of people with mobility problems, pregnant women, people with walkers, canes, luggage, baby carriages. I propose that as a study. Some of the subways have had seats removed to streamline entrance and exit and to speed up the movement. I also suggest more flip-up foldable seats which would accommodate people. Not everyone would use them. It would open up space for those who need to sit. That would be available. I propose that be investigated. My line, the E-Train, is one of the lines that's affected. Nobody called me, asked me. I guess you don't have my phone number. But I was aware of the new demo.
You have a half minute to wrap up. Thank you.
New demo car and at the Hudson Yards 34th Street station. I saw it a week or two ago, less seats, and the person who interviewed me, I mentioned accessibility to him. He said, oh, that was all taken care of with Access-a-Ride, which I don't think I have to review some of the issues related to that now. You
have to conclude, Ms. Fisher.
Case of the MTA and was clueless about accessibility.
Thank you, ma'am. Jason Pinero, then Mary Kessinger.
Good morning, everyone. After a month being disappeared, I decided to take a break, but I'm back. First things first, I'm in favor of the third track project for Long Island. This is way overdue. Second of all, instead of pressuring Cuomo to put more money into the subway system, why we don't knock on the door on a person called Warren Wilhelm Jr., as known as Bill de Blasio? Because as we know, the subway system operates in New York City. So he should be the one putting his portion towards the subway system. And I hope that in 2018 we see better and reliability on the service. That's on a downfall. And literally we're going back almost 30 years. And I hope that the board member gets that message. And I wish everybody happy holidays.
Happy holiday to you as well, Mr. Pinero. Mary Kessinger. You got a hand mic, Adrian? Good. Thank you. Good morning. Ms. Kessinger will be followed by Pedro Valdez Rivera, Jr., and then Vincent Albanese.
To do today is to make you familiar with our concerns.
I'm sorry, keep that mic closer to your face, Ms. Kessinger.
Okay.
We'll hear
Can
better.
you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I'm here to make you familiar with our concerns, and I'm speaking about wheelchair users on the subway. And in order to do that, I want to issue you a challenge. The only way for you to understand our problems is for you to actually use a wheelchair. So I challenge you to rent or buy a wheelchair and use it for a week. Keep track of the time that it takes you to find the elevators. keep track of the time that it takes you to find the boarding area, and how long it takes you to find the elevator to the street, and how to find the signs, and how to figure out how to get in and out of the station. Now, my main concern is safety. The platform and the floor of the subway cars are not level. Consequently, someone has to help me get aboard. Sometimes they help me to get aboard when the floor, help me get off when the floor is actually lower than the platform. Invariably, a complete stranger has to come to help me. When he or she has pulled the front of the scooter onto the train, I hear the booming announcement, "Stand clear of the closing doors," and the doors start to shut, and I'm only halfway on the train, and I'm afraid that the doors are going to cut me in half. Now the scooter is only halfway on, and I'm in the boarding area where the conductor can see me, and the doors begin to close. I shut my eyes and hope that it doesn't cut me in two.
You should wrap up, Ms. Kessinger.
Now the doors retract, and someone lifts the back end of the scooter on, and we're good to go. Except once. The rush to get in, my foot slipped and got caught between the platform and the subway car. A quick-thinking person pulled my foot out and pulled it out of the gap. Otherwise, my foot would still be there. The solution is in your backyard. This problem was solved by New Jersey Transit, where you find a conductor, he or she brings a ramp which fits between the doors, and I'm on the train.
You have to conclude, Ms. Kessinger.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're always welcome back, and if you think that you have a longer message than you can send or deliver in 2 minutes, feel free to correspond with us or bring us something to leave with the board. Thank you. Pedro Valdez Rivera Jr., then Vincent Albanese, and then Stephanie Burgos will be our final speaker. I don't see Mr. Valdez Rivera Jr. Vincent Albanese. Good morning.
My name is Vincent Albanese, Director of Policy and Public Affairs for the New York State Laborers, representing over 40,000 New York members of the Laborers International Union North America. We're here today to submit public comments regarding funding that has been committed and allocated to construct the main line expansion on Long Island, also known as the third track. We understand that while there's been a renewed debate surrounding this funding, while we recognize that it's directly correlated to the other needs of the MTA, we as an organization adamantly oppose redirecting any funding that is required to complete the main line expansion. The New York City subway system is also certainly in need of capital investment to fix its own ailing infrastructure. And this we also strongly support. But once again, we do not believe it should impact any commitment that's already been made to Long Island. Our members are construction laborers. Hundreds of our members on Long Island will benefit from the good, sustaining middle-class jobs this investment will create. These jobs sustain countless other jobs as they bring economic growth and steady incomes that will circulate through all the little shops, restaurants, etc. in the communities. But our advocacy on the merits of this project isn't just about the jobs it would create in the interim. It's about the infrastructure it would create long-term for our members and the middle-class workers that rely heavily on the LIRR. Many of our members live in Long Island and commute to the city every morning for work. But many of our members would like to commute to Long Island for emerging construction jobs that live here in the city. This doesn't work when the trains don't work. This is a real thing. When they can't commute, it's hard to remember why they even put their boots on in the morning. When they miss dinner and children's baseball games, school plays, all because they can't rely on a consistent commute, that's not fair to 3 million residents of Long Island. It's also not fair to the 8 million residents of this city that would like to commute to Long Island for those jobs as well. This project has been debated in the community for nearly 70 years. Countless proposals have failed before Governor Cuomo's bold leadership took this fight head on and found the plan that would work for everyone.
You should wrap up, Mr. Albanese.
There was not a single local elected official along the main line who didn't endorse the plan before its adoption. The approval of this project was an example of government working for the people in the best sense, and the end result was a project that people were not just content with, but one that they cheered for. It is transformative for every Long Islander and every New Yorker. And it would just be a shame to watch this example of good government go bad in favor of politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Stephanie Burgos. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Burgos Veras, and I'm a community organizer at the Riders Alliance. And as an organizer, I get to speak to bus riders every single day who share their stories with me about how unreliable their bus commutes are. And I often hear that riders have to wait 20, even up to 45 minutes for a bus. And when that bus does arrive, it's often very crowded, and people cannot get on. And so riders then have to make three decisions. Either they wait for a bus, and who knows when it will come. Number two, they can squeeze onto the front, which can make it very difficult if you have groceries, if you have kids, or if you have a walker. Or number three is that they have to hop on through the back to get on the bus because they need to get to their destinations because they cannot wait an extra 45 minutes for the next bus to come. And so we know that buses are in a crisis. The stories say it, and also the data shows it. But there is something that we can do to turn around our buses. And what that needs, and we need actual political will from Chairman Loda and Mayor de Blasio together to work to improve our buses. But actually, there is something that the MTA can do right now that doesn't have to depend on Mayor de Blasio, and that's all-door boarding. We have this great opportunity where we have a new fare payment system. It's been 20 years, and we don't know when that will come again. And so this moment right now, we can give riders all-door boarding on all local buses citywide to A, improve the lives of 2.5 million New Yorkers, and two, actually improve the lives of bus drivers who are always have to deal with a congested bus. And so we ask of you, bus riders, all 2.5 million
You should wrap up, Ms. Burgos.
Ask Chairman Loda and the MTA Board to adopt and commit to having all-door boarding citywide on local buses by the beginning of 2018. Thank you, and happy holidays.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the public comment.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. To begin today, I'd like to say how proud I am of the first responders and all of the MTA employees who reacted heroically to the subway system terrorist attack that happened in our Times Square complex on Monday. In October, late October, we actually worked together with the Federal Department of Homeland Security as well as all of the members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force in an exercise at Grand Central Terminal. It was a Sunday night, I believe at 2 a.m. in the morning it started, where we prepared for an event, something similar to what happened on Monday. And then a week later in November, we conducted an agency-wide tabletop exercise with the NYPD that helped in coordinating our response this past week. And thanks to our vast network of security cameras that were able to quickly provide videos to the NYPD, videos that showed the suspect where he entered the system, where he switched from one train to another, and then ultimately getting off in Times Square. The fact that we have these elaborate multi-layered security system in place, it's important to know that many of you can see it, some of you can't see it, but what I think it should do is it should give New Yorkers a great sense of comfort to know that every single day that we work closely with the NYPD and all of our partners in law enforcement to keep our entire system, not just the subway system, but the railroads and the bridges and tunnels, and all of our customers and employees safe. Speaking of our employees, I'd like to discuss how an MTA station cleaner, Sean Monroe, described the scene after the bombing, which he did in a newspaper published yesterday. He said, "You start to panic for a second, but that's your first instinct. Your next instinct is to think of the training that you received from the MTA and let us direct these people out of here and as far away from the situation as possible." And that's exactly what Sean Monroe did, quickly directing customers to the nearest exit. There have been no additional specific threats to our system related to this attack, but we have nonetheless significantly stepped up our security efforts, increasing patrols and surveillance in order to provide heightened protection across all of our operating agencies. This incident serves as a stark reminder that we must always continue to be vigilant. It also reminds us that it's more important than ever for all of us to work together to keep each and every one of us safe. And I'd like to take again this opportunity to remind everyone remind all of our customers and all of our employees again, if you see something, say something. Second item I'd like to discuss is the working groups based on the recommendations of this board at the last meeting. I've created working groups to take a new, intense look at areas of persistent challenge to us and to come back with new approaches to improving service and efficiency in those areas. I've asked Scott Reckler to lead a construction cost working group. I've asked Chuck Merdler to chair a procurement reform working group, Veronica Vanderpool to head up a paratransit accessoride working group, and Ira Greenberg to lead a subway railroad accessibility working group. Additionally, I've created a subcommittee of the Joint Railroad Committee to be led by Neil Zuckerman to focus on the implementation of positive train control. And in all cases, MTA staff will be there to fully support the members of the board who are on the committees and the subcommittees. And if any member of the board is not currently on a subcommittee and would like to be, please check with Donna Evans as soon as you can, because many of the meetings have already commenced and would like to get your input. But before you get to her too soon, because my next update is to say a few words about outgoing members of the MTA family, one of which, in fact, is Donna Evans. The other is Jeff Rosen. Donna is retiring at the end of this month after a remarkable 37-year career with the MTA. She obviously started when she was 12. She started here as a college intern in 1980, quickly moved through the ranks all the way up to her current position as Chief of Staff, where she oversees every single MTA employee and coordinates with board members, agency presidents, and senior staff. She has direct responsibility for overseeing board-related communications, planning, emergency management, homeless services, relationship with the New York City Transit Museum, and the MTA Arts and Design Program. She has spent much of her career in public affairs, media relations, and corporate communications at Metro North and New York City Transit. In 2007, she was named Metro North's first Chief of Staff in many decades, and she went on to serve under 3 Metro North presidents. Jeff Rosen hasn't been here quite as long as Donna, but he's had a hugely beneficial impact on this organization. Jeff joined us as a Director of Real Estate in 2009 after an almost 30-year career as an attorney in private practice. Under his leadership, MTA Real Estate has steadily increased our recurring annual revenues it generates for our operating budgets from $206 million in 2010 to almost $300 million in the past 12 months, an inflation-adjusted increase of 17% per annum. The MTA Real Estate Group, which he manages, expanded and upgraded the retail experience at many of our facilities, including most notably the Apple Store in Grand Central Terminal and the Turnstile Shopping Center at Columbus Circle. The real estate group has also managed contracts for the disposition of air rights at Hudson Yards, which has generated more than $1 billion for our capital program. And the real estate group also executed under his guidance our office right-sizing plan, which reduced our square footage and significantly expanded our use of this building, freeing up for commercial redevelopment our former headquarters in downtown Brooklyn at 370 J Street, as well as 341, 345, and 347 Madison Avenues, where our corporate headquarters used to be located. Donna and Jeff work in very different areas, but they share a few common traits. They are both incredibly hard workers. They have always put our customers first in every decision that they make, in part because they are in fact customers. They've both earned their reputation as creative thinkers and people who just want to get things done, plain and simple. So today, for all of these reasons and more, I'd like to say thank you to both of you on behalf of everyone here at the MTA. Thank you for your service. Congratulations on your retirement. I'm looking forward to that someday myself. You will be missed. So Donna and Jeff, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, could I add something on that
Yes.
issue, please?
Yes.
I've been here a long time, sometimes too long, but I want to thank, and first of all, I want to apologize to Donna for the thousands of emails I've sent her over the last 12 years on all kinds of issues, and one thing you could always get from Donna is a diligent and quick response, which is all one ever asks for when one is on this board. So I want to thank Donna very much for all of her assistance in making my life easier. And I also want to apologize to Jeff for badgering him and badgering him and badgering him about Penn Station. And it's much better now that he's leaving than it was when he came. And for Jeff, for all the residents of Long Island, we thank you very much for that.
And Jeff is in the back of the room, standing by the monitor back there. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Donna, very much.
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
yes,
I just want to add a few. I also want to say how much, on behalf of the city, we are going to miss Donna. Her knowledge, her professionalism, her sense of humor, her kindness, these are treasured qualities. She's truly irreplaceable, so we will miss her tremendously. And thanks to Jeff for all his amazing service. I know he has brought a lot of revenue to this agency and served it so well. And I know we'll see he'll have a very successful next career. I look forward to seeing what that is. So thank you both.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Subway Action Plan. And once again, this month we are seeing improved performance as a result of the plan. It speaks directly to the #1 goal of the plan, and that is better service and a better experience for our customers. If you look at the statistics that were in the transit book, I'll reiterate some of them here. Major incidents, just a reminder, major incidents are those that delay 50 or more trains, which completely wreak havoc to our rush hours. So here are some of the results. Weekday major incidents in June were at 81 of this year. They've dropped to 64. That's a 21% improvement from June, a 10% improvement from a year ago, and an 11% improvement for the 12-month rolling average. And I can tell you the preliminary results that I'm seeing for November are getting even better. Weekday major signal incidents were 25 in June. They've dropped to 16 in October. That's a 36% improvement since the program started in July. It's a 45% improvement from what it was a year ago, and a 28% improvement over the 12-month rolling average. Average monthly, daily, weekday signal incidents from July to October were down 25% when compared to the first half of calendar year 2017. Using these same comparison periods, weekday major track incidents improved by almost 4%. Weekday major power incidents have improved by 50%. Overall, weekday and additional platform time in the peak improved by 6% when compared to that same period from March to June, compared to July to October. Over that same period, additional train time in the peak improved by 5%. Mean distance between failure, the single best statistic to measure the reliability of the subway fleet, was more than 123,000 miles in October, an increase of almost 7% from a year ago in October 2016. And the 12-month rolling MDBF was 119,000 miles this October, a 5% increase over the prior year. All of this is a direct result of the extraordinary work of our transit workers and their managers who have been working day and night under the Subway Action Plan to install new miles and of track and more reliable track and repair thousands of signals and various track defects. Finally, I'd like to some sad news to report. Last Friday, Mark Shapiro, who was an assistant train dispatcher in Brooklyn, collapsed while on duty and later passed away. Assistant train dispatcher Shapiro began his career at the Transit Authority 24 years ago as a train conductor and has served the New York City Transit Authority as an assistant train dispatcher for the last 18 years, since 1999. On behalf of the entire MTA family, I express my deepest condolences to all of his friends, his co-workers, and to his family. And with that, before we start the meeting, are there any comments to be made? We'll go right into the minutes. There being none, the minutes of the November meeting have been distributed to all the members. Are there any corrections or omissions? If not, may I have a motion to approve these minutes? Moved, seconded. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Minutes have been approved. And now let's begin with the report from the Committee on Finance. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 5 action items for board approval. The first item requests board approval for the documentation to issue new money bond anticipation notes and bonds in 2018 to finance up to $3 billion of capital projects set forth in approved transit and commuter capital programs, and $200 million of new money bonds to to finance capital projects set forth in approved bridges and tunnels capital programs. The next action item approves the documentation. Do we need a board action, or did I? Well, I'm just going to go through all that.
Go through all of it.
All right. The next action item approves the documentation, issue refunding bonds in 2018 in accordance with the refunding policy adopted by the board in May 2010, and to allow for a portion of the transportation revenue refunding bonds and dedicated tax fund refunding revenue bonds to be issued as variable rate securities to refund bonds. The third action item requests the board approve MTA and TBTA adoption of reimbursement resolutions for federal tax purposes. The next item authorizes the extension of the energy supply long-term agreement and energy services program agreement with the New York Power Authority agreement. The last item requests the board approve the installation of advanced energy metering in MTA facilities utilizing the services of the New York Power Authority in furtherance of the objectives of Executive Order 88. The committee recommends these action items, and I move them.
I second them. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The items carry.
Mr. Chair, I just want to recuse myself from both NIPA votes.
Noted, so noted.
There are no non-competitive procurements. There are 2 competitive procurements in the amount of $3.1 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second that. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
There are 4 ratifications in the amount of $12 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
I'll second that. Are there any questions or comments?
These are the ratifications on the executive order, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I had one question about the outsourcing of emergency medical personnel. How long will that be for? I assume this is something that under the Subway Action Plan we're planning to hire people directly. Is that correct?
I'd like to address it to Phil Ing.
That's correct, Chairman, Commissioner. The intent is to have EMTs strategically positioned throughout the system. There are 8 of them across the system right now, and we're seeing them improve the response time when we have 6 passengers as part of the action plan, to be able to get the trains moving again.
So do you have a sense of what the schedule is for hiring, and how long will this emergency procurement for temporary outside emergency personnel be for?
There were 8 positions identified, and they're on board.
Contract?
Yeah, they're on board, and they're functioning right now, assisting us.
And they're only there until we hire permanently? Is that directly? I mean, I just don't quite understand why. I understand the need to start this now, and if we can't hire directly now, I understand the need to outsource it, but if we're going to hire directly for it, for how long a period are we outsourcing, and what's the schedule for hiring?
Well, right now, the intent is to evaluate how it improves response time, and as we see that, we'll make determination how long to keep the program going for. But obviously, it's one where we've seen sick passengers result in, extenuating delays to our riders. So the more ability we have to respond quickly, the intent is to evaluate the program as it moves forward.
No, just to be clear, I'm fully supportive of the need and desirability of having emergency medical personnel at certain stations, and how important that is. My question isn't to the need. My question really is to the method, and whether we are intending, or whether we even know whether we plan to hire permanently for these jobs, whether we continue to outsource this function, or what.
We don't know at this time. We're still evaluating the program for its success. Then we'll make a determination as to what is the best way to go about doing this. Should we outsource it, or should we make it inside resources to do it? It just becomes a function of, let's see how successful it is first, and then we'll make an economic decision about whether or not we should hire employees to do this, or whether or not we continue to outsource this.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments before we vote? Motion's been moved. I've seconded it. So are there any, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? The motion carries.
There are no real estate action items this month. The Finance Committee considered and voted to recommend the adoption of the 2018 final budget and financial plan for 2018 through 2021 and the 2015 through 2019 capital program amendment. Board action on the budget and the amendment will be presented following the other committee reports. And, Mr. Chairman, I just want to acknowledge, and I'm sure all the other commissioners on the board would do the same, I just want to say thank you to all the MTA staff and all the first responders for their bravery and their response to the most recent incident there. It gives you a sense of comfort, I think, to all New York State residents that we know that we can count on not only the MTA staff but all first responders when there's any kind of an incident, whether it's a terrorist attack or some other type of emergency, that they run to the emergency to keep us safe and protect us. And I think we all greatly appreciate that. And we can't say thank you enough to them as public servants, but also as fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and people with families. So thank you to all of them. Thank you to the MTA staff.
Thank you very much.
That concludes my speech and the Finance Committee report.
And now a report from the Transit Committee from Commissioner Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There are 8 procurement items in a total amount of $57.8 million. There are 2 non-competitive procurements for New York City Transit in a total amount of $43.2 million, described on pages 174 through 180 of the board book. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Do we have any questions or comments on these procurements? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
There are 3 competitive procurements for $11.1 million for New York City Transit, described on pages 181 through 186 of the board book. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? They carry as well.
There are 3 ratifications this month for approval, 2 for New York City Transit for $2.7 million, described on pages 187 through 189 of the board book, and 1 for MTA Capital Construction for $800,000, described on pages 190 and 191 of the board book. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
And I'll second them. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ratifications carry.
In addition, the Transit and Bus Committee considered and voted to recommend the adoption of the 2018 final budget and financial plan for 2018-2021 for New York City Transit, Staten Island Railway, and MTA Bus. Board action on the agency budgets will be presented with the adoption of the MTA 2018 final proposed budget and the 4-year financial plan for 2018 through 2021, following other committee reports. And that concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
Thank you, Commissioner Ferrer.
Thank you.
Now on to the Joint Railroad Metro North Committee, Long Island Railroad Committee report, and it'll be given by Mitch Pally.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Metro North Railroad Committee and the Long Island Railroad Committee met jointly on Monday and reports the following. There is 1 non-competitive procurement for Metro North Railroad in the amount of $498,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
There are 7 competitive procurements this month for approval, 2 for Metro North Railroad in the amount of $110.2 million, which includes the walk-in item at the committee included in the board book, 2 for the Long Island Railroad for $1.92 billion, and 3 for MTA Capital Construction for $104.3 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the...
Sorry, Jim.
Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, first,
I recognize Mr. Weiss.
Okay, thank you. And first, I just want to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Schwartz and yourself, Mr. Chairman, regarding the heroism and competence of the MTA staff on Monday, which was both extraordinary and I think gave a lot of security and reassurance to New Yorkers. With respect to the $1.9 billion item that Mr. Paley just mentioned, which I assume is the third track.
Yes.
As I said at Monday's committee meeting, I'm going to support this because I really believe in the importance of the regional economy, and I also do believe that third track, when fully implemented, will benefit New York City commuters commuting to jobs on Long Island, and that the percentage increase in those commuters is going up, and going up even at a faster rate than Long Island Railroad commuters into the city. But having said that, as I just want to reiterate what I said on Monday, I am just concerned that for all the value that this brings to the region, and particularly to Long Island, there is no value capture here. The planning has not met the full potential of what could be done in terms of sites along the right-of-way of third track, and we already know that this project is $500 million over initial estimates, and so I continue to hope that we can get some value capture, and a significant amount of value capture out of a project that is being touted as of such great economic benefit to the region, and particularly to Long Island, from Long Island, which benefits so substantially from this. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will endeavor to find more areas for value capture, but I will say all future projects will take this into account. In this particular project, we will work with the communities as well as the entire surrounding area to find avenues and ways in which we can receive value capture, including the potential for incremental financing related to getting legislative changes to allow it to happen. Those are all part of our legislative agenda for this coming session. Mr. Vidiello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, would like to associate myself with the comments of my colleagues and thank those first responders and certainly the MTA staff. As related to the third track procurement, firstly, let me make clear that I'm not opposed to the third track project. I certainly believe the people of Long Island should have better service and more of it. However, I question the wisdom of another multi-billion-dollar project at this particular moment that was conceived and procured in largely the same manner as other major projects that cost too much and have taken too long. Our cost of capital construction is too high, and our ability to accurately project capital construction costs and timelines is too low. 2 years ago, third track was estimated at $1.5 billion, 6 months ago at $2 billion, and last week the board learned that the budgeted cost would be $2.6 billion. This follows the pattern of rising costs associated with East Side Access, which grew from approximately $4.3 billion to $10.8 billion, and evidence suggests this might rise still higher. To lend a sense of scale of these projects together, which are really codependent, these projects will incur collective costs that are more than all business taxes collected by the entire state of New York for 2 years, or the entirety of property transfer taxes collected by the entire state for over 6 years, or approximately $650 for every man, woman, and child resident to the state of New York. Based upon the roughly 140,000 riders third track will use third track, if every one of those riders also uses East Side Access, the combined cost of delivering this increased service will be over $90,000 per rider. It's not that we shouldn't do these projects, but we need to find ways to lower their cost, and we need to institute meaningful ways to find value capture. And in my opinion, we shouldn't undertake another multi-billion-dollar project anywhere across the system until we do. We need our elected officials to partner with us to fix the state's broken and onerous procurement laws. We need to reinvent the onerous and costly nature of how we procure even outside of the state's procurement law. And when projects like this create tens or hundreds of millions or perhaps even billions of dollars in value around them, we need to find a way to participate in that upside. We need to stop absorbing the cost of creating economic value while being left out of the upside. All of this being said, and recognizing the reality that this project will likely be approved today, I would ask, Mr. Chair, that we explore a more aggressive approach to value capture associated with the project, which might include real estate investment and development. I'd also ask that prior to actually executing the relevant agreements, the board have the opportunity to have a third-party consultant review the RFP's requirements in legal terms, and in an attempt to identify high-cost, low-value items that the MTA staff might not have been empowered to change, but this board would. And more broadly, I would ask all of us to be cognizant that we are in an economic red zone that is challenging our ability to keep what we already have in a good state of good repair, and we would be wise to expand the system very, very carefully right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For those of us who use this system every single day, we put our lives in the hands of the thousands or tens of thousands of workers at the MTA, and I want to thank them and those in particular who were involved in Monday's bomb for their judgment and their excellent competency and decision making. I just want to make a comment on LIRR third track. I am incredibly supportive of this project. Like many of my fellow commissioners on this board, I made comments during committee meetings regarding value capture and a missed opportunity there. So I won't reiterate that, but I do want to say I support those comments and think we need to move forward, and we have 4 years to do so. I also made recommendations for the MTA to take a lead role in terms of working with municipalities to maximize opportunities. And one way we can certainly do that is around the parking garages and really try, and this has already been identified as opportunities for PPPs to build the 4 parking garages along the third track corridor at a cost of $84 million, $21 million each garage. I really think that we need to find a successor to Mr. Rosen who can really work as hard as he or she can to defray the cost of building these garages to the MTA. Thank you.
As we talked about at the Metro North Committee meeting, I too feel the third track for the long term is a very important thing for Long Island, the Long Island Railroad, and the MTA. The only thing is I feel that these massive capital projects have really put us in a really giant hole. You take a look at the state of the subway system, the state of the railroads. A lot of this happened because we have diverted billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in these large capital projects. I'm not saying they're not needed, but for example, here we're going ahead now with going to be a $2.5+ billion project for the third rail, and we really don't have accountability for the East Side Access Project. As Jamie said, it started as a $4 billion project. It's now over $11 billion, and I think as fiduciaries on this board, we have had very little oversight of where this project has come from and where it's going. I know Jano has promised to give us a full report in the first quarter of 18, but to me it makes no sense to embark on another one of these huge projects without first coming to terms with where we stand on the ongoing ones. So I hope that this one, it's going to be passed, and I just hope that we do a hell of a lot better job managing this one as we did than we did with East Side Access and the 2nd Avenue subway, because if not, we have $40 billion, soon to be $40 billion worth of debt here, and we're going to see this system and the MTA eaten alive by these runaway projects. So I'm going to vote for it. I abstained at the Metro North Committee because
it's going to happen anyway, but I think that we really need to do some serious soul searching here, and I know Scott is working on this, and I know Jano, I think, is a very capable guy, and hopefully we'll control this project a lot better than we've done in the past, but this is really serious stuff, and it's put us in a deep hole.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up. I, too, will vote for this project, but Bob Herman pointed out we're now moving towards a debt service load that's going to move towards 19% of our overall budget. That's a little frightening to me. I know it's sustainable, but if we keep getting these sort of cost overruns of the scale we're talking about, that may be conservative, I just say that, but that's not appropriate for this organization, and that's why we've been very supportive of efforts by you, Chairman, and others to get another revenue stream involved here.
Thank you. Commissioner Reckler?
Yeah, a couple of points I just wanted to follow up on. I think that, first, as the project itself, I mean, obviously critical for the region. If we don't take a regional approach, and as Carl said, look through a regional lens, relative to where our workforce can live and afford to live and have a quality of life to commute, we're not going to maintain our competitiveness. And I think these projects, the challenge on timing is these are projects that are in multi-years, multi-decades in the planning. Here you have the Long Island Railroad, 100 years since it was built, and really no upgrade since that was the case. And so to move all the stakeholders to a point where you're ready to move forward, sometimes you never know exactly where that's going to happen, but it was clearly a Herculean effort to get all the different stakeholders in the local municipalities to give green light moving this project forward. So I think it's a critical project, and I think the time is here. I do agree that we need to be cautious in terms of the cost, and I do think from my conversations with Jano and the reports that he's given this board that this is hopefully a model of the more transparent approach in terms of the bidding process. I think what we've seen on things like East Side Access historically was that we never really had the right budget amount. That they made estimates that we ultimately lived with, and then as it kept happening and the scope of the project kept getting refined and changed, the budget ballooned. From at least the reports that we've gotten from Jano and the staff, is they've done their homework, really done this design build, have flushed out what this scope is, and they're being transparent in telling us that based on that scope and based on going out through that bidding process, this is the number. And so I do hope this is a new beginning of how our capital projects are evaluated and move forward, where we sort of have a clear understanding of what that cost is from the beginning. And Jano, if I'm saying anything you disagree with, then tell me. But I think that's the case. I will also say that on the value capture, it's critical, and I think the chairman made a good point that it's not something yet that we figured out how to implement. But I know from my standpoint as a real estate owner, when public transportation is built in front of my buildings are worth more, and I should pay more of a proportion of that cost because it's a responsibility from the social good to do so, right? And I think we have to find a way to marry that together, and I think that's something in the city and in the suburbs. As us putting infrastructure in place that's going to help the economy and help individuals create more profit, that's actually disproportionately they help fund those costs as we go forward. So I'm encouraged that we're going to make that a priority, but do recognize the complexity in actually making it practically occur on non-MTA related land. And so it's something we should do, but it's not going to be easy to get done without a lot of help. And then lastly, just in this committee that I've been chairing, clearly the area in terms of understanding how we actually invest in our capital projects needs to be reinvented. And I think that the hope here is that we pick the spots where we can that are identified where there's some low-hanging fruit that won't be easy to change, but that would have the greatest meaning by making those changes, and some that we can implement more quickly as we roll forward. And with all these projects, I will say, and this is sort of my view as we look here today, we have underinvested woefully in our infrastructure for decades, and we have to be careful here of overreacting to the fact that we have this challenge. The real issue is we need a sustainable source of revenue, and we as a board need to come together and talk to all of our stakeholders and people we can influence to help find that sustainable source of incremental revenue so that we can invest in the region's infrastructure. I don't think the answer is not investing in our infrastructure.
Thank you. 151 years ago it started, Long Island Railroad. Commissioner Greenberg.
I just want to comment, first comment is that the Long Island Railroad Communities Council strongly supports this project, has strongly supported it for many years. Very happy to see it move forward. I do want to thank Andrew Cuomo. This project was stalled until the governor got involved and pushed it forward. That's of note. As to value capture, I just want to note at our real estate committee meeting, the county executive of Suffolk was here, Steve Ballone. There's a new county executive in Nassau. I think it's worth engaging them in conversations regarding zoning changes that might be appropriate to encourage transit-oriented development on the Long Island Railroad, and that this project is not fully funded in this capital program. It's a portion of this project that needs to be funded in the next capital program, and maybe we should discuss that with the county executives of Nassau County and Suffolk County regarding value capture and zoning and the like, to see what can be done there so that some of that money can come to the MTA, maybe to fund the finish of this project. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes. Commissioner Wartendijk.
These mega projects that we have been really pushing out 200, 300%, and they're not even done yet, some of them. What can be done to notify the board of what these changes are? Not nuts and bolts and all that crap, just regular, why did it increase that way? You know, if you're doing a highway or something by the mile or something, and I know there's a lot of things that go into it, but if we could get a little synopsis and just give it to us, or have a meeting and tell us why. I mean, that's terrible, the overruns on their jobs.
Well, we will provide information regarding East Side Access, which is what Jano has said that we're coming in the first quarter of this year, and we'll look at the other projects. At the CPOC committee meeting, we do have it on a regular basis, almost quarterly, monthly going through each project, quarterly going through the major projects specifically in there, but we can prepare, that information is available. In addition to that, both the working groups that Scott Reckler is in charge of, as well as Commissioner Merdler involved in, will also address ways in which we can do a better job of procurement and ways in which we can build better, including whatever legislative changes we need for procurement or tax increment financing. But yes, we can go through, as we have over a period of time, gone through why every time something has gone up over the original estimate.
I'm looking for something that you can pull out of the regular bid that was there. If it was X amount of dollars
Sure.
this time.
Absolutely. I understand.
And just pull them out and say, this is why. Thank you.
Let's talk subsequently to make sure that whatever we prepare answers and your question and satisfies it.
Thank you.
So I'll work. Jano, if you could just, thank you. Commissioner Merdler first.
Pardon me. Mr. Chairman, I would like to first pull together a strain that occurred throughout all of this discussion. There have been questions concerning what are we doing about long-term, large-scale projects and how do we scale them down. There have been questions about how we can deal with procurements and how we can address them. And I think it is something that ought to be noted for this reason. The chair appointed committees of this board, to which every member of the board has been invited to join one or another committee to address precisely those problems. And as Commissioner Weisbrod and Commissioner Vanderpoel know, that in the procurements area, as in the construction area, that process has started, and we are taking a good hard look at it. That's a first for this agency. That's an attempt by this chair and this agency to move forward and to do it on a constructive and valued basis. And I think that has to be recognized. It's going to take time, but it will have a bite, and it will have a positive result. And while on the subject of positive results, let me turn to value capture. It's an excellent idea. I congratulate and thank Commissioner Weisbrod for making the point, and others as well. But I turn not to something that is prospective, but something that is today. You can look at the value of real estate taxes realized by the City of New York along the 2nd Avenue stretch, where the 2nd Avenue subway was built, and see in total relief, stark relief, how much of a value that has increased in real estate taxes for the City of New York. Mayor Bloomberg paved the way at the outset with value capture on the Hudson Yards. This city administration should do the same on the 2nd Avenue subway that is being built, that has been built now, and that will be built in the future. If value capture is, as I believe it must be, a critical part, then it is time for those who advocate it to join in making it a reality. And the classic example of all examples is the 2nd Avenue subway, and I thank you. One more thing, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Schwartz made the point that a lot of good people demonstrated the very best of New York the other day in their response. There's one group, in fact there are more than one, that also need recognition, and that is the volunteers who streamed in from all corners of the city to provide help in terms of emergency services. Hot Solar, the Volunteer Ambulance Corps, sent in dozens of emergency responders. There were others as well. Those folk deserve great credit, and I thank you.
Yeah, I can't vote for it, but I think it's a great idea, but I just want to hope that in all of the discussions that we've had here, that there's going to be not strict monitoring, but good control over it. That if something is going to go wrong, that right away corrective action can be taken, so we don't have any problems in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to thank you. I think we're having a very robust discourse. We did in committee as well. That is a different tenor and level of conversation and openness for this board, at least in my tenure here. I appreciate you facilitating that and being so open to it. I think it's a great turn for the board, and I appreciate all the views that were expressed today and in committee. Thank you.
Are there any further yes?
Joe, I apologize for prolonging the praise of value capture. Railroads and the subways is all about value capture. It always has been. It always will be. And I suggest that when we look at the value of these properties and these developments, it's not just the specific value to the specific real estate owner that happens to abut the stop, but the entire system's value appreciates as a function of that particular expansion. And the Long Island Railroad project, I think, is a sort of prototype for that sort of view. However, the opposite is true, and I think you see that in the Long Island project as well. When you have these little tiny specific balkanized individual interests that override the value that the rest of the system is attempting to impart upon itself, everybody pays. And that's part of the huge inflation of this project, is a function of that NIMBY resistance that was so strong in this particular location. Now, I do think that the railroad feeds off of density, and density feeds off the railroad. And that until you can really get those two, I mean, you guys got into the big ideas, so I got to pretend I got big ideas too. Is that you really have to marry those two functions in order to have an effective value capture. Because the whole system has to appreciate the value, and the whole system has to appreciate the expense when that value is stifled.
Thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, the motions have been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention. Jamie Vitiello. Thank you.
May I go back to the...
Yes, the committee. Yes,
And
I'm
can
trying to find my notes. Where were we? Oh, yeah,
And if I could have one moment of personal privilege from the chair. I didn't want to say anything before the vote for fear of changing people's minds the wrong way. But this is I thank my fellow commissioners from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of John's heart and the 2.8 million people who live on Long Island for this confidence, not only in the railroad, but in the economy of Long Island and the economy of New York City and the economy of this region, because we are linked together. While this project may just be physically in Nassau County, it affects every one of my constituents in Suffolk County, all of John's constituents, and all of the constituents who live in the city of New York, because they'll be able to move further and further, quicker and quicker, and more efficiently. I also want to take a moment to thank very much the people of Long Island, especially the people who live along the route, and the elected officials for understanding, albeit a little late, but finally understanding the importance of this project to us. I want to thank the interest groups, especially the full committee led by Dave Capel and the Long Island Association and the laborers for their tremendous support for the project during the process. I want to thank County Executive Ballone and County Executive-elect Curran for their support of the project. That was very important. And finally, I want to thank the Governor of the State of New York, without whom support this project would not have happened.
You couldn't have done all that before the vote.
No, I didn't want to do it before the vote in that regard. Getting back to the agenda, my pleasure, thank you. There's one ratification for MTA Capital Construction for $2.9 million. The committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
I second it. And are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion
In addition, the Metro-North Railroad Committee and the Long Island Railroad Committee considered and voted to recommend the adoption of both Railroad's 2018 final budget and financial plan for 2018 to 2021. Board action on the agency budgets will be presented with the adoption of the MTA 2018 final proposed budget and the four-year financial plan for 2017 to 2021 following the other committee reports. And this concludes the Joint Railroad Committee report. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next is the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report by its chairman, Commissioner Merdler.
Mr. Chairman, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Monday, and I report the following. There are 3 competitive procurements this month in the total amount of $95.1 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second that. Do we have any questions or comments before we vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
There are no non-competitive procurements and no ratifications. The Bridges and Tunnels budget and financial plan was discussed during the committee meeting, but without a vote. The board action on the Bridges and Tunnels budget will be presented with the adoption of the MTA 2018 final budget and the 4-year financial plan for 2018 through 2021. This concludes the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Merdler. On to the Corporate Governance Committee report. I chaired this committee on Monday. We had a freewheeling discussion that will continue into our next meeting. The agenda items that we had were tabled. However, as I mentioned at the meeting, we do have one that we need pursuant to statute to approve. That are the procurement guidelines that are in the board book for today's meeting. There are no change to these guidelines. However, we will be changing the guidelines as the working group comes forward, and we'll have the opportunity to do that. So I move that the board approve the all-agency contract procurement guidelines and the all-agency service contract guidelines. Second. The item has been seconded. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that motion carries. We now have on to the adoption of the MTA 2018 final budget and financial plan for 2018 through 2021, and at which point we will consider its adoption. Upon discussion at the Finance Committee meeting, the Board amended language in the staff summary on page 5 with respect to the Subway Action Plan by changing the word authorized to recommend. We have distributed the revised staff summary. It's at your places. At our November meeting, MTA CFO Bob Ferran briefed us on the budget and the financial plan and the materials that were provided to the board. I now turn the floor over to Bob to introduce the action items we will be addressing today for the 2018 budget and the financial plan. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've each received an electronic version of the MTA 2018 budget and 2018 to 2021 financial plan adoption materials. These materials include the 2017 final estimate and all plan adjustments, the individual agency budgets and financial plans, authorization of the budget and plan adjustments, and direction and authorization for the chairman, managing director, chief financial officer, or their designee to take budget and cash management actions or other staff actions as appropriate. Mr. Chairman, the staff recommends that the board adopt the proposed MTA 2018 budget and the 2018 to 2021 financial plan.
And at this time, I move the adoption of the 2018 final proposed budget and the four-year financial plan for 18 through 21 and all other actions presented in the board material. Do we have a second? Second. Item's been seconded. I'd like to open the floor for discussion on the budget before we have a vote. Does anybody want to have any comments? Commissioner Troughton.
I will kick us off, and I want to echo many of the other. First of all, again, I agree. Thank the incredible MTA staff, the first responders, both NYPD, EMT, volunteer services for their fast and remarkable response on Monday. It's been a tough time in New York City. We've had several terrorist attacks in recent months, and every time we're very fortunate to have amazing, dedicated people who are on the scene doing what needs to be done. So thanks to all of them. And congratulations to my Long Island colleagues. It is a big day for you, and I'm happy to support the project. But I do share, particularly, I was there at the beginning of East Side Access. I worked on Capitol Hill at the time, and I think it started out as a $3 billion project, not a $4 billion project. So it obviously, and that was many years ago, so it would have naturally grown in price tag. But I share Jamie's interest in having a process where we really do keep the cost in control, because although I think that's an important project, look, from the New York City centric point of view, that's a big chunk of capital dollars that are not going to go into fixing the subways, another high priority for this agency. So certainly we want to make sure those dollars are well spent, but congratulations to you all. I know it's a big day. So a lot of you probably heard my comments on Monday at the committee about why I'm not going to be supporting the financial plan, and I think there's some larger questions we're all facing about what the fiscal picture looks like for the city and the state, given what's coming out of Washington with the tax plan and what I think is starting to see a bit of a fiscal slowdown, unfortunately, at the city and state level, and what that means overall for our financial health. But I think my main objection to this financial plan as it's presented, and I appreciate making the change from authorizing the staff to just essentially unilaterally change the subway action plan to having to recommend it to the board first. But I just don't agree with the contention that the subway action plan should be the only thing on the chopping block, so to speak, if we find ourselves, as I think we will, having to navigate some difficult fiscal waters. I've asked several times, and other board members have as well, to be presented with other options, other potential ways we could reprioritize and economize. So far, the answer has been we're not going to do that. I do think the subway action plan is the most important thing in our operating plan, and I take heart very much at what the chairman has said and congratulate the team here at the MTA that some of those indicators we're seeing are starting to improve and it's bearing fruit. And I can't support a plan in which, if the fiscal picture, for whatever reason, city-state doesn't materialize as we would hope, that's the first thing on the chopping block.
Yes, Commissioner Reckler.
I just wanted to respond to one of the highest point, because I think what the chairman said at the last meeting with respect to what was going to be on the chopping block was that there's a whole series of contingency items that would be considered, that the subway action plans identified because that was something that was discussed. But now, I mean, I for one, would assume that to the extent we have a fiscal problem or we have challenges and we have whatever happens with the federal budget, that there's going to be a reevaluation of everything in this existing budget that's going to have to come back, and we're going to have to right-size it for whatever sources of capital we have. So I appreciate your point, but I do not think that that was the intent in the scope. And I think the concept now of recommend, which was established before, versus them coming back, just making the changes, enables us to have that discourse at the time if we have to have that discourse.
Well, just the language that I think we're now voting on will say, recommend necessary changes to the scope of the subway action plan and the February plan to match available funding. One thing I have pointed out, I don't think the city or the state will fully know what their fiscal picture looks like in January. I just don't think that's realistic. But I think this should say we'll authorize an entire menu of things for this board to consider, but frankly, I think we should have had some sense of that menu before this vote today. I think it was irresponsible not to. I think we need that information to make a sound judgment right now. We're voting on, you know, an operating budget at a time when our fiscal situation, again, city, state, nationally, is very much uncertain.
Just to ask the chairman in the mix if you could actually start working on those contingency plans, so to the extent we do find ourselves, which I'm sure you are, but that we can have some dialogue in that and at the appropriate time.
I will. Yeah, I think Commissioner Weisbrot first, then Ira.
Well, I want to associate with everything that Commissioner Trottenberg said, but sort of add my own personal, I guess, irony to this. I agree that, as Commissioner Trottenberg said, that the subway action plan, which we've all said is the most important thing that we are doing right now, and the most important need, and yet that's the only thing on the chopping block in a budget that we all recognize is going to be revised many, many times. But for me, this is really a personally bitter experience because in my previous position as chairman of the New York City Planning Commission, I oversaw the rezoning of the Vanderbilt corridor, which has provided, just in value capture, and already, without asking anything in return from the MTA, $220 million to the MTA to revitalize the Grand Central Station, which is going to benefit, obviously, New Yorkers, but Long Island residents someday when East Side Access is realized. Just before I left City Planning Commission, I devised, as this board well knows, a rezoning of East Midtown, which has now been enacted, which has as its first priority in terms of value capture improvements to the transit system, and to see those unilateral, in a sense, investments by the city with cooperation from and support and close working relationship with the MTA staff, end up with the only thing on the chopping block being the subway action plan, I find really, really unfortunate. And I'm really surprised that that is what MTA management has decided to do.
Commissioner Greenberg.
First, I want to say thank the first responders and our own staff for responding at Times Square. I was actually on the train on my way to Manhattan at the time to the meetings here when an announcement was made that all trains were bypassing Times Square. And if you know enough about the system, that's kind of an odd thing. And I felt that something terrible was happening, but it seemed that our staff acted quickly, all the employees acted very quickly, and everything seem to go well in that regard. Regarding the budget, I too agree with Commissioner Trottenberg in the respect that this document seems to target the action plan. If we're going to make if the board is responsible for making choices when something goes sour, let's say economically, or even with the state legislature, or maybe a city voluntary contribution, then we have to make that choice where to appropriate things. It seems to say that the subway action plan is the first target, where maybe some people here think it should be the last target. I happen to agree it probably should be low down on a cut list. As far as a city-state contribution here, we know at least I know the reality of this, is that the state has a lot of power. The governor actually can't do this unilaterally. He has to have the legislature vote for it. I assume this will be in his budget. The budget can also require that monies that are given from the state to the MTA require a local match, which would mean the city would have to match if the money is, and the money could say it's specifically for this thing. So I think we do have to, I do not agree with Commissioner Tromberg, however, in that we have to see a plan now to cut. I think it's premature because the state budget hasn't come out yet. And I think that's something that we have to wait and see before we can start to make that decision. But I do think it is precarious, but I do think we are obligated to wait until that time.
To Commissioner Trottenberg's and Weisbrod's concern, I want to point out that I think, speaking at least for certainly myself, but I think for some others, the way we amended the wording of accepting the budget, to Commissioner Reckler's point, was to leave us complete latitude in what we cut, and I think its existence in there, suggesting it would be the first thing, was just the most, at least in my view, efficient way to amend the wording so that it could be acceptable, but left this body the complete authority to decide what gets cut. And speaking for myself, I would certainly be looking for other areas and not have it be the first thing on a chopping block. And I hope that many of us are aligned in that view, despite the wording that's in there. But certainly from a strictly, I think, legal standpoint, it's my understanding that we've got that discretion without the wording approve in there.
But can I just, thank you, Jamie. I just like to respond. The language says, now I was going to say, recommend necessary changes to the scope of the subway action plan in the February plan. It doesn't say recommend changes to the scope of the February plan in a variety of areas. And I think my frustration is I have personally asked to be given some other options the board can consider. They're not forthcoming. I don't have any confidence that they'll necessarily be forthcoming in the coming months. And I think it's interesting what my colleague Commissioner Greenberg just sort of said. We're not going to know how this all plays out until the state budget plays out. I think that's a fair point. The state budget doesn't play out till April. But we're going to be obviously trying to make some of these decisions in January. I mean, I am troubled by the timing to the extent that the city is going to, that we're having a negotiation with the city. The city doesn't know its full budget picture until we see what the legislature does up in Albany.
So if I may, before we hear from anyone else, because I've heard numerous things said that are not, everybody has their own reality. So my reality is as follows. There was a proposal put forward for a subway action plan, and the proposal was 50% paid by the state and 50% paid by the city. At the board meeting, I believe in October, a commissioner asked, well, what will happen if the city doesn't pay? The budget needs to reflect that. This budget does, in fact, reflect that, and it's my expectation that that day will never happen, and it won't. But if it does, nothing in this budget is on the chopping block. Incendiary words like that don't do anything to help the discussion that we're having. We should need to have an open and honest discussion, but if anybody wants to continue to use the words cutting block, they really need to think about what those words mean. What we're doing is that if the money doesn't come in specifically for the surge, which I call the subway action plan, if the money doesn't come in, we're going to have to stretch what we need to do out over a period of time. And to do that, we need to make decisions relatively soon because I gave my commitment that I will not fund or do anything that goes outside what's in the budget. That said, if in fact we have, on a broader sense, a decline in the economy, tax receipts go down, state budget impacts, city budget impacts, As I said the other day, and as we should all know, we meet on a monthly basis. We get budget watch reports that are distributed before the meeting as to what actually happened in the prior month. And as we look at that, if we need to make any additional cuts because revenues are coming in below what's budgeted, below expectation, we will come to the board with recommendations, and the board, as it always has and always will make those cuts, if necessary. If necessary is the operative word. That's the nature of a budget. A budget is something that talks about what a projection is of the future. You update it for reality, and in this case, each and every month. That's exactly what we're going to do. So remember, what we were asked to do was to address the issue of what would happen if we didn't get the full funding as requested. That's what we're responding to. Now we're being told by doing that, people can't vote because they want to see alternatives to that. Look, I'm not going to negotiate publicly like that about what we would do and not do, but if we absolutely see a reduction in our revenues coming in outside of this plan across the board, which has an impact on all of the operating agencies, bridges and tunnels, railroads, subway, capital construction, we will be back as the staff came back in 2008, 2009, and 2010 with how we will balance the budget. I have a responsibility, as all of you do, to make sure that we end the year on a balanced basis, and we'll have to take, if necessary, evasive action to do that. It also goes in the other direction. If by chance revenues go up, if by chance we have an opportunity to do other things that we don't have in the budget right now because revenues are going up, we'll be back to you with ideas. Either that or we'll roll it into the next year and use it then. But budgets go up and budgets go down. Our responsibility as a board is to look at it on a monthly basis and make decisions. Nothing's changed in that regard by how this budget's been put together. Commissioner Pally?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that explanation. I agree with the previous speakers on the importance of the Subway Action Plan. For those of us whose commuters use the subway, it is essential to our getting to the end point for many of my riders, and we will do everything we can, working with all the members of the board, to try to get it done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We made the change at the Finance Committee, which I think was important, to send a signal that this board will be the one making the final determination. No one else will. And we'll make that determination if and when, and hopefully we never have to, but if and when we need to do so, we'll make determinations on that issue as well as a whole host of other issues that will come forward. I did want to make one other point that I have made over the last couple of months, and while I will support the 2018 budget in its current form, I do not want anyone to assume that is a support for the current four-year financial plan. I still strongly believe, even more than ever now, that the legislature and the governor must look at the 2009 MTA funding agreement, reconsider it. Its time has come and gone, and it is essential that our funding partners from all levels of government look at that program, the commuter, the subway rider, in a variety of different ways, and I agree with my commissioner to my left, is paying too much of the burden that is going on, and we need to find other ways to ameliorate some of that. And now is a perfect opportunity to do so with whatever funding sources our friends and stakeholders ultimately agree to. It is essential that we not only look at funding for the capital plan, but we look at funding for the operating plan to reduce the continued reliance on fares and tolls. In my opinion, it has become untenable at the moment. I've made my position clear for the last couple of months. I will continue to do so. So I do not want anyone to assume that my vote for the 2018 budget in its current format assumes fare and tolls going forward. Those are decisions this board will have to make at a later time as our Chief Financial Officer indicates to us. Some of us may be more inclined to do that than others, but we'll get to that at that point. But I don't want anyone to assume that my vote in favor of today's budget takes that into account. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So noted. Commissioner Vanderpool.
Mr. Chair, while I appreciate the persistent clarifications that you've provided most recently on numerous occasions with regards to the language being used around the Subway Action Plan, I do think that there is a problematic premise of even stretching out the Subway Action Plan should resources not materialize. The reason why I think it's problematic is there's two. The first is this was a proposal, as you've stated, that was put forth without input from the city representatives, nor discussion with the board body at large until much later. So the city is being expected to be a partner, whatever the merits of that expectation are. We were not included again with any input. For any input, our input was not solicited, nor was this a larger board discussion. These are new times. This is an emergency situation that has been declared by the governor repeatedly after every 30-day cycle since the first declaration was made. That very nature of an emergency action necessitates different actions that we've not yet seen before. The fact that the Subway Action Plan is the only element of our financial plan and operating budget that is being considered, to reiterate the comments that have been made before, to be stretched out or elongated is problematic. We already have mechanisms in place to rectify and address interagency needs. For example, we have an interagency loan program. We also most recently heard at Monday's committee meetings that for the third track program, $100 million is being transferred from LIRR's capital program to MTA CC to get this project done. That's not even a loan. That is not a grant. It's money being transferred from one capital program, one agency, to another agency's capital program. So again, while very much the Subway Action Plan needs to be revised and examined, and I support and appreciate the recommended language, there should have been other scenarios. Why not another interagency loan option? Why not looking at transferring funds from another? This needs to be an agency-wide approach. Now, I am one of the very few people who understands that MTA's revenue sources and dedicated taxes are not fungible. These are not fungible pots of money. But what we've seen recently is some uncomfortable fungibility of these resources. But it's arbitrary and it's discretionary in some ways. So the point that I'd like to make is this is a very uncomfortable financial plan. While every budget contains tenable assumptions, I used to run a nonprofit, and every year I had to present a budget that was not based on a good deal of certainty, but the majority of my budget was not based on all these tenuous assumptions. When we see the state budget, I implore every board member around this table to very carefully look at the state assumptions. For example, the restoration of the replacement funds for the payroll mobility tax. That is already baked into our financial plan. If we don't see that money, who around this table is going to call attention to that at the state level and at the state budget? So that's just one example of all of us needing to be consistent advocates in our positions, not just on Wednesday board meetings, but as we're looking through the budget cycle.
In your conversation about fungibility of funds that I think you might have said concerned you, separately from this, can you go through that with me? Because I'd like to know what they are. Those assertions, they concern me, and I'd like to be able to figure out what they are and rectify it.
Mr. Chairman, I was struck by the wonderful simile proposed by the exceptionally able Commissioner of Transportation of a chopping block. A chopping block is of no value unless you have somebody who wields the axe or who wields the scimitar. And who wields the scimitar is the City of New York's mayor. New York City has failed in its responsibility, as has the mayor in his responsibility, to provide the monies to make the subway action plan function and function effectively. Years ago, the city of New York extracted an inappropriate benefit for itself, if I may, and I am a resident of the city of New York and a proud resident of the borough of the Bronx. When it required that the MTA bear the bulk of the burden for the cost of paratransit. An unfair bulk of the burden, I should add, and that agreement should be renegotiated from beginning to end and provide more funds for paratransit. It is true that we need options. We need options to deal with the issues that came up this morning: elevators, escalators, bus service, discounts for veterans. But those options rest in the hands of the man who wields the scimitar or the axe. It's time to stop talking and put your money where your mouth is, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, please. I'm going to savor being called exceptionally able, because that's the nicest thing I'll probably hear today. Look, I think we could spend all day in the long list of grievances between the city and the state and who actually wields the scimitar. I probably have a very different view on that than my esteemed colleague. And I don't want to keep prolonging this discussion. I'm just going to go back to whoever you think should pay and when they should pay and whether we should renegotiate every old deal we ever had. Maybe we should, but once you open that can of worms, it's going to unravel in a lot of different ways. I'm just going to go back to the basic point. You don't want me to say chopping block? I'll use another euphemism, extend the time, change the scope, whatever it is. I think it's going to have an impact on the subway riders, and I think as the board, it's not the way we want to go, regardless of how things play out in Albany. And we all may disagree. We may decide in the end that if the mayor doesn't do what you want him to do, this is the thing to cut. It's above my pay grade, who does what, but I don't think this is the thing that we should cut. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Or slow down, or stretch out, or change the scope of whatever euphemism you want to use.
So when we had our briefing the other day on the subway action plan, it was clear that the entire plan, should the city not fund their half of this, is not getting cut. The most important pieces of the action plan, cleaning the track beds, the emergency medical personnel, the signals, and the electrical system, will proceed. So it's sort of a misnomer to say that it's getting half done. The stations and the rolling stock element may get stretched out, but that's not the case. It's sort of, I mean, Commissioner Merdler sort of stole my thunder, but it's sort of ironic that the four city members are really high on the subway action plan, if only the person that appointed them was just as high on the subway action plan. However, we don't know what the city and state budgets are yet, and Commissioner Palley's remarks about we can't keep relying on the fare box and tolls sort of emphasizes that that I hope, and I assume some of the other folks here hope, is that there is a really thorough discussion of a new, sustainable, long-term funding source for the MTA, so that a lot of these things can get done in a more timely fashion. Stretching out always ends up having them cost more, as is the case with East Side Access and Third Track, and eventually Phase 1 of 2nd Avenue, and now we're waiting on Phase 2's funding. But we really need this new source of funding, and I hope that we will all have something to say about that in the coming months, because that is a discussion we must have if we are to treat this system, this treasure of a system, the way it ought to be treated for our customers. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for your clarification on the chopping block issue, because I was going to speak up and say something on it, because it was not accurate and was misleading. So I appreciate the clarification that at worst case it would be, you know, a delay of completing the program, but it will not stop. The program itself will not stop, and will continue to make improvements on performance and reliability and safety, as we've already done in the short term. I've heard a lot of comments about financial uncertainty. Yes, there's financial uncertainty coming out of Washington. There's financial uncertainty with our economy. But in spite of that financial uncertainty, the governor of our state has been unwavering in his commitment to fund at least half of the subway improvement program. He has not said once, regardless of the financial uncertainty, my commitment that I made to improve service, performance, reliability, safety of the program, am I going to waver on that whatsoever? We are a regional transit system. That includes suburban counties, that includes the city of New York, includes the state of New York. A regional system requires regional cooperation. It requires the cooperation of everyone. We have to have, our counties have to be partners, the city needs to be a partner, the state needs to be a partner. And, you know, I have the impression, before we take a vote, that the mayor's appointees are going to vote no on the financial plan. And if they do that, that would be a shame, and I think a disappointment, because when you vote no, you're basically saying, I'm voting against the Subway Action Plan, which I heard everyone say is the most important piece of the financial plan. When you're saying no to the financial plan, you're saying, I don't support what's in the financial plan. There's always time and opportunity to resolve problems and come up with solutions to things. I don't think the solution is voting against the plan. And I'm still hoping that the mayor is going to come through, and the mayor is going to make the New York City subway system and the whole MTA system a priority and figure out a way to come up with money to help support the Subway Action Plan as well as other things here. And I would urge the mayor's appointees not to vote no on the financial plan today, but to support it and to continue to work with all of us in figuring out ways to solve problems rather than just criticize things that you don't like. Thank you.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the Subway Action Plan, but I just want everybody not to forget there's $1 billion approximately of cuts in here and cost savings over the next 4 or 5 years that haven't been identified yet. So, and I'm also concerned about the real estate taxes. I think everybody should be because of the new tax bill that's coming down. So there are a lot of major things in here that could adversely affect the budget other than the action plan. So we're not out of the woods at all. I'm going to vote for this budget, but I think we have to really take a good look at this thing right after the first of the year. I know Bob watches it every month, but we have to be very careful, because if we don't identify these cuts and real estate taxes start to slip and some of these other big items, we could be in a hole pretty fast with this budget. So we've got to be very careful. And Bob, I hope you watch us, you know, like you always do, very carefully.
Mr. Chair, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page, at least with how management views it. Is it your view that if the plan, the Subway Action Plan, isn't fully funded at the point in time at which you would need to decrease velocity and extend it in order to complete it, which is my understanding of how we view the worst-case scenario, that's going to come back to a conversation with this board, and this board, if it so decided collectively, could say, keep the velocity of that plan in place and find an alter. Your microphone.
I apologize. That's not my understanding. The velocity has in fact slowed down already, because we cannot be, you know, generally it takes at a minimum 4 weeks to hire someone and to bring them on board. That already started back in November, because I have to keep to my word that I will not hire more than what is allowable in the budget. And so, no, I don't agree with that.
So Is it your view that it is the purview of the board, if it's so desired by a majority of it, to decide, I want to keep that velocity going, and
if you want to, you know, stay here, come in every single day. We change the subway action plan every day based on reality of what we're finding in the system. You're entitled to do that, to come in and do that. But I don't expect to come back to this board if I don't have the funding to tell you that I'm going to stretch it out. I've already told you that we're going to stretch it out. Period. If we don't have the funding.
Okay.
I cannot spend something that I don't have.
Agreed, but isn't it?
Nor can you.
Isn't it in the purview of the board to say, well, if the city didn't come up with, I don't want to say come up with, the city didn't fund the expectation you had, to say let's find $400 million elsewhere to spend so that you can keep the velocity going on that? Is that not a viable option?
That is an option, but it's not one that I'm prepared to play out.
Okay.
But doesn't the board, if the majority of it decides that's what it would prefer, have the authority to make that direction?
You have to be very specific, not in generalities, but have to say exactly what is being cut.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is the crux of my difficulty with voting yes for this. That suddenly this is encapsulated. The governor has stated this was the primary emergency. So I haven't heard of a state of emergency before. And yet when it comes to how it's funded, in the subway action plan, we're not going to consider other parts of the system and other priorities.
Yeah, the subway action plan did not have a time frame on it when the emergency was declared, and it's been extended out. I assumed that their partnership with the city would allow the funding of it to happen sooner than later. If it can't happen sooner than later, the timing, which was totally within my purview, to actually determine when it happens. For some reason or another, you think it's locked in granite. It is not.
I'm saying that why aren't other parts of the systems being considered to augment, to come up with this $450 million? Why is this suddenly, we've just helped Long Island, we've just done other things, we've spent $1 billion ultimately on the new cash, touchless system. We've put enormous amounts of money in subway upgrades with USB ports, and suddenly, subway action plan, we have to slow it down until the city brings. That's what I'm having difficulty with. That you've essentially put this in a capsule suddenly, that we're no longer a region. We're no longer a major generator of economic movement. So that I still have a problem with this. I understand your point, sir, but this really sticks in my craw.
Mr. Chairman, I congratulate and thank the city representatives for fighting for what is good for the subway system in the city of New York. That's their function, that's their responsibility, and they discharge it. But in the process, I think they missed 2 points. One, it is the function of management to manage, and the function of the board to provide oversight. Not our proper province to say when, how, and where, in terms of how it's individually spent each and every day. That's a basic tenet of corporate management and government. Number two, yes, you can move money around. You can. For example, and I don't suggest that this be done, we spend about $450 million a year, roughly, on our share of paratransit. You could move that. I think that would be a terrible thing to do, frankly, and I would vote against it. But you can move that. At the end of the day, there's a very simple answer. And I know the city is faced in a terrible quandary by reason of the absolute moronic nonsense of the United States Congress and of its president. But I will tell you that you absolutely can find the money by saying, we have, for example, value captured in the increased value of real estate along the 2nd Avenue corridor, 10% of that real estate tax, 20%, 8%, whatever the number is, should go toward the subway action plan. Lastly, I want you to remember the genesis of the subway action plan. Joe Loda proposed it in response to the governor's demand as a plan that would be a whole plan, one that would be a partnership between city and state. And the governor came up to the plate and he offered to pay his half. The city has not. Now, frankly, there are 58 different ways the city can be made to pay it, whether it be by a reduction of state aid or otherwise. That's stupid, and I wouldn't advocate it. But the city has a responsibility. It has a responsibility to its taxpayers. It has a responsibility to the subway riders. It has a responsibility to put its money where the deputy mayor's mouth is.
Can the city's representative respond? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I defer to Carl. But I do want to respond.
Thanks, city representative.
You're a city representative too, but everyone's glaring at me.
I would just like to respond briefly to Mr. Murdler. It is first and foremost, it seems to me, the responsibility of this board to establish priorities. It is the responsibility of management to manage, but it is the responsibility of this board to establish priorities. And what the spending priorities of this entity are should be established by us. We haven't had that opportunity. We have been presented with a spending priority which says it recommends that the first thing that happens if there is no money, additional money from the city, is that the subway action plan will be whatever, extended. There could be a million different things that could be extended under spending, and that's our responsibility. Second, we just voted for a $2.5 billion third track program, and I supported that. But we asked the question about value capture. Are the counties and towns and villages and taxpayers of Nassau and Suffolk County contributing to that? And the answer was, well, we don't know. Maybe we missed this opportunity. Maybe they will at some point. And that's fine. I support it because I think it's an important project, but frankly, not as important as the immediacy of the subway action plan. I still supported it, even though whether there's going to be a contribution or not is unclear. It seems to me that when we say that the subway action plan is the most important thing before us, we should not be making a preliminary determination, and in fact, as the chair has already indicated, implementing that recommendation without the authority of this board to decide this is the place that we are going to make our first cuts.
I want to certainly echo what Commissioner Weisbrod said, which is I think the board should decide what slows down what we make our priority. And I don't think, Joe, that it's fair for you to say, give me the detailed list. That's not what board members do. You all need to provide us with a list of options. You've given us one. You say, I don't want to bargain with myself and I don't want to put options on the table. Well, you put the subway action plan on the table, so you're willing to put one option there. I guess I also, because we're talking about terminology and people choosing their own reality, you used it, Commissioner Murdler, and you used it too, Mr. Chairman, the word partnership with the city. I have to take exception to the notion that we didn't sit down and negotiate a subway action plan together. We didn't agree on a list of items. We didn't agree on a price tag. We didn't agree to stand together. You all did this unilaterally. You didn't do it with the board and you didn't do it with the city. I don't know how it's going to play out. Maybe the city will do what you want. Maybe, again, that's totally above my pay grade. But I don't view that as a partnership. Not in the way that, frankly, I traditionally view partnership. And not in the way, and I'm happy to say later today, stay tuned, fellow board members, an area where the city and the MTA are in partnership. We're going to be talking today about some of our plans for mitigating the L train. And there we have a true partnership. We've worked together from day one. We respect each other. We roll things out together. We're having sort of, I think, a fair and very good process. I don't think the subway action plan in any way parallels what we're doing on the, so I sort of have to take exception to the notion that this has been a great partnership on the Subway Action Plan. It doesn't, we're the junior partner in every sense of the word.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that you have already ratcheted back the Subway Action Plan. How long does it take to ratchet it back up, and how quickly could that be done?
Action plan, as I mentioned, literally changes almost every day. I mean, work that Phil Ang has been doing and coming back as an engineer and understanding exactly what's happening in the system. You know, when we put the plan together, we didn't realize the severity of the water problems, and in fact that drains might not have been cleaned for as long as I'm alive. And so we had to alter the change, and we've done that. And as the recommendations that we've shown you over time, it does change. We keep it within the envelope of the 834, 836, that number in there, to keep it within that number to be able to get it done. We can ratchet it up and ratchet it down in any given way. If I find something today that I didn't know about, I'm going to have to reprioritize, because if I think it's something that will go a long way to reducing delays, that is, to me, the most important thing.
Ratcheting it up involves the hiring of more people, obviously.
It's hiring of more people, and in some cases...
And training those people.
Hiring of more people, and in some cases hiring of companies that would be needed on a part-time basis, not full-time employment.
Mr. Chairman, just point of information, can you remind me of the date when you and the governor announced the Subway Action Plan and the funding for it? When was that again? July what? 25th. So since July...
She knows better. I would.
Okay, I'm okay with Ronnie answering the question. Got the answer. So since July 25th, we've all known, right? We've had a Subway Action Plan out there, and the governor made a commitment to fund half of that plan and called on the mayor to work with him and fund the other half of the plan. So this has been out there for 6 months. Everyone's known this. And again, what I would urge the mayor's appointees on this board is to support the financial plan and go back and recommend to the mayor, since I've heard it from all of them, that the Subway Action Plan is the most important thing in the financial plan, for the mayor to come through with funding for the plan. Instead of putting the burden on the MTA, or putting the burden on the state, or putting the burden on someone else to figure this out, the mayor should decide to be a part of the solution, not be a part of the problem, and to come up with funding for this plan that's been out there for 6 months, and where the governor has repeatedly said, and the chairman has repeatedly said, and others repeatedly said, this is, I'm coming up with half, the city needs to come up with the other half, period.
Mr. Chairman, I too am left with a sense of irony, but for wholly different reasons. As a reformed politician, I'm not averse to having a political conversation. I rather like them. But I don't like calling them what they are not. I don't like calling them a policy conversation. No, it's a political conversation. So too is this. Nothing wrong with saying, I don't want to pay this. The mayor of the city of New York can decline to pay anytime he wishes. He's an independently elected official. So say so. And then moving forward, when I was part of making budgets and proposing them, dealing with a very smart guy who used to be the chief magistrate of the city, tell him, didn't like what you're proposing here. In fact, some of you served him. He said, well, what do you propose? Now, we knew what that was. When we declined to say, he said, no, 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 no. If you're going to make a comment on this, it's fair. You're going to make a proposal? It's fair. Tell me what you propose. And what I would urge my colleagues is, if for some reason you are unready about this, don't like it, think it's unfair, think it's out of line, propose something different. And we should all respectfully hear it out and discuss it. But to simply say, we can't do this because we can't do this, just isn't good enough for me. That's a political conversation masquerading as a policy conversation. And I'm not here on this board to do that. And I know you are not either. Let's have an honest discussion about this. You don't like the way it was proposed, you don't like the limits of it, you don't like the duration of it, you don't like the funding of it, say it. And then let's deal with that. Because it's important that we work together for the same system. I use the system like you every single day. I rely on it to get from place to place, like you, every single day. And there's no substitute for it. Not a cab, walking perhaps, but sometimes people don't like walking all the way from the Bronx to Lower Manhattan. It's a little inconvenient. Let's try to find a way to work this out together. And let's call things what they are. Again, I respect the mayor of the city of New York saying, I will not pay half. That's okay. And both these gentlemen who are chief executives of the city and state are friends of mine. I supported both. I respect them both. If the mayor declines to pay, that's fine. I would urge my colleagues to come up with their own alternative, and let's discuss it. Let's have an honest and open discussion about it, and let's move forward.
Commissioner Feded, I don't disagree with your comment. I will say that I think some ideas have been put forth. For example, I said interagency loan. But it's not my responsibility or duty as a board member to get into the granular details. What it is my responsibility to do is put forth a suggestion such as that. And for staff and others to say, well, that is not viable because X, Y, Z.
Just to clarify, an interagency loan cannot increase or decrease the budget. It only relates to the cash flow. If one of the operating agencies doesn't have the cash flow to be able to make its payroll, for example, it can borrow from another operating agency to make its cash flow, but under no circumstances does it increase or decrease the budget. It's purely liquidity issues, and that's what the loans are about.
So, just for the record, I want to be sure Larry and others understand. I work for the mayor, not the other way around, and so obviously he will decide what he's going to do here. I think at the moment he's said a couple things. One, he's for the millionaire's tax, but has also signaled a willingness to go to Albany and look at other things, be it congestion prices, being other things. So I don't think he said he's doing nothing. I think he has also said, interestingly enough, I forgot the exact dollar amount. I think it was $468 million that should have gone to the MTA, and dedicated taxes was sort of siphoned off to the general fund. That money should be restored, but he has not shut the door to further discussion. I don't think just having a press conference saying, here's our plan, pay half, was necessarily the best way to sort of get those negotiations started, but I'm sure there will be some negotiations, and in fact there have been some discussions. I strongly disagree with the notion that we, the board members, have the knowledge to come up with alternative operating budget scenarios. I don't know how that could possibly be. We have to rely on the MTA's expertise to provide alternatives. I would have no idea what to propose there. I mean, I've read Citizens Budget Committee and others have put some ideas on the table. I have no idea whether they're meritorious or not, but I don't think that's our role. I think that's your role, to give the decision makers on the board some options. And we may say, nope, we don't care. We're going to slow down the subway action plan instead. I mean, I'm not precluding how my colleagues might feel when they looked at the options, but I can't come up with options, but I would like to see some. I've wanted to see some for a couple months now.
So I believe everyone's had an opportunity to speak, and I'd be more than happy to continue this over lunch, but we have other agenda items beyond this that we need to get to, and as Commissioner Trottenberg said, there is a wonderful partnership between us and the city regarding the closure of the L line and the Canarsie Tunnel, which we need to get to so that the public and the elected officials can get there. That being said, if there are no further comments on this item, the item has been put forward and it has been seconded and open for discussion. So now for the vote. We should probably do it by hand, given what I've heard. So all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Got it?
Okay. Everybody got it? Yes. All right. Those who are opposed? 4.
Got it.
And those who have abstained? Motion carries. We now have the last item on the budget. Ask Don Spear to present the 1519 capital program amendment. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The capital plan amendment in front of you would increase the capital program by $348 million in 4 main areas of investment. It further authorizes us to utilize bond proceeds for that purpose so we continue to move forward with the capital portion of the Subway Action Plan. These actions are consistent with the information that was presented to the board in the MTA's financial plan presentation in November. This amendment only requires board approval. It does not require CPRB approval, as the increases we are seeking in the various elements do not meet the CPRB threshold. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great, thanks. I'll second it, and I'll open it for questions, comments. Any? Hearing none, then...
No.
I'm sorry, Carl. Sorry.
I've just to hear the... my understanding, again, here is that there is, if the Subway Action Plan is stretched out or reduced, it would also affect the capital budget portion of the Subway Action Plan. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
It won't stretch it out beyond 19. It's all within that time frame, so there is no change whatsoever.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is that...
This is 15 to 19. We're adjusting it during that period of time.
So, I mean, a significant portion of the Subway Action Plan
the car
is
conversion.
capital,
and
was allocated to the 15-19 plan.
Respond.
The component that would not be funded would be the car conversion, Don, I believe so, and that could be done later. But at this time, we wouldn't need to do that because it's not affecting the things that we're doing on the operating budget. So
just to be clear,
yes.
So from what you're saying, Bob, currently the plan is to fund some elements of the Subway Action Plan in the 15-19 period, but if the Subway Action Plan is whatever, extended, delayed, cut back, that funding that's currently allocated to the 15-19 plan would be deferred and cut back. Is that deferred? Is that correct?
Yeah, only the funding for the cars.
So, okay. So, and I just want to respond or just take up the challenge that Commissioner Ferrer offered, which is an alternative. I think that we have in the capital budget now a significant amount of money for the Enhanced Station Initiative, with many phases still to go. And to me, and I think to the vast majority of subway riders, as desirable as the cosmetic improvements we've seen and are proposed for the enhanced station improvement, I think most riders would want to see an aggressive implementation of a capital program, including new cars, that would operationally improve the system. And so in terms of an actual change in the capital budget, in terms of an actual at least assurance that the capital provisions of the subway action plan are realized as soon as possible. I propose that, and if that proposal is accepted, I would vote for the capital budget amendment. If that proposal is not accepted for that reason, I would vote against the capital budget amendment.
Well, I'm only one person on the board, Mr. Chairman. I would not support Commissioner Weisbrod's idea. I'm happy, to discuss with Commissioner Weisbrod and every other member of the board about future decisions that we should make, including maybe we shouldn't do Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue subway. These are actual stations that people use day in and day out, and they deserve the opportunity and the right to have these stations in good working order and modernized and updated. So these are existing stations. There's no existing Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue subway, and as much as I support it and would like to see it happen, there's a lot of other capital projects that, we can talk about with other members of the board, with the city here, and see what their position is if we have to make future adjustments to the capital program. So I'm ready to vote for the capital program with the station enhancement in here, and I don't know if anyone else has any further questions, but I would like to move the vote.
It's my understanding that the Enhanced Station Initiative package was already voted on the Capital Program Amendment number 2. This amendment is just for the increase in the Subway Action Plan. So there were 2 commissioners already around this table. This was preceding Commissioner Weisbrod's time on the board that did vote against the Capital Program Amendment number 2 and did point out ESI packages as a reason for doing so. I do not think, though, moving forward, though that's not on the table for this amendment, with regards to the ESI packages, I think any city subway ESI packages should not move forward. I voted against them before because while they are very worthwhile improvements, not all of them are as essential or actually more important or emergency related than the components of the Subway Action Plan. And to reflect my comment today, I actually did give a previous vote against one of the ESI packages for the subway stations to complement my point now. But I just did want to make that clarification that we're just voting on this Subway Action Plan.
By hand, all in favor, say aye. Okay. All those opposed? Got it. And there's obviously no abstentions in this process. Thank you. The amendment passes. Who would like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second it. Thank you. I hope everybody has a very happy holiday season, and we'll see you in 2018, if not before.
I'm going to be...
Hi, good morning. Before I start, I want to reiterate some of my comments I made earlier today about what happened a little over 48 hours ago up in Times Square and the Port Authority area, Port Authority bus terminal area in the subway system. And one thing I didn't mention, but I do want to thank the workers. I mean, one of the things that I saw when I went up there, I was here at the time when the message came in, and Ronnie and I both went up together. Others were there. But when I got there, I noticed that there was a manager within the New York City Transit Authority system doing roll call of all of the subway workers to make sure that they were all accounted for and safe. And that's indicative of the planning that we've been doing on behalf of all the people in the city of New York, because we are, as we know, and have always been some form of a target, but we're never going to let that affect us. We're going to continue to keep moving on. And as the best part of that day was being able to say by 9:30, 2 hours later, the subways were up and running, with the exception of stopping at stations in the 7th Avenue line as well as the 8th Avenue lines at 42nd Street. But the rest of it was up and running. And that goes to the resilience not only of the system, but of the workforce. And with that, fire away. Alfonso, how are you?
Your first term here years ago, when it was kind of a dirty word, and now it's finally here. Just wanted to get your thoughts.
I have a beard and I had my head, right.
Wanted to get your thoughts on the passage of the contract, and also on some of the concerns raised by board members about whether this is a wise use of $2 billion.
Well, I think one of the things that was missing in today's discussion and debate was that this didn't change the capital budget. This capital budget was approved. It had this amount in it. What it did was take the dollar amount within the capital budget and actually put it into a contract. The discussion about third track, go, no go, whatever was going on, really should have taken place at the time when they approved the capital budget. This was now taking what was approved and now putting it into a contract so that it can get done. It's an important project, economic development, not just for Long Island, but for the region. It's really important for people to understand that there are, in the main line of which other lines come into, there are 2 tracks. And in the morning, both tracks are being used to go in, and therefore no one in a reverse commute can come out. And it has a big impact on the economy, both the people who live in the city, as well as people who live in the city, I apologize, as well as the people out on the island. So in the reverses in the evening, we need to build that. This is something one of the public speakers actually said that, this has been discussed for almost 40 years. In addition to that, there was also, the double track. We have part of Long Island between Farmingdale and Ronkonkoma, a separate project, but all part of the Long Island Railroad expansion plan, which has a single track, which means train can only go in one direction because, you can't have them running into each other. This is important for the economy of Long Island. It's important for the economy of the region, and for everybody who wants to talk about the regional transportation needs so that it's all coordinated in a great way, which is how East Side Access was originally proposed, back in the early 90s, thereabouts, when it was proposed for the opportunity for people who work in that portion of Manhattan to be able to live on Long Island and not go to Penn Station. There were huge, this is a continuation of what we need to do regionally, and it's extremely important for the economy of Long Island. And anything we can do to get people out of cars and onto mass transit is a very good thing, both for mass transit, obviously, but also for the environment. Mr. Siff.
Joe, you had some numbers indicating that the subway action plan is working in terms of major signal problems, mean distance between failures. You probably wouldn't be surprised if we talk to commuters this afternoon and share those numbers. If we get some raised eyebrows. There are a lot of folks who are still not feeling the improvement. What do you say to riders about when they'll actually be able to notice a more reliable commute?
So, on any given day, anything can possibly happen. And I'll use today as a very good example. On the number 4 and 5 line, we had, someone walking on the tracks, not allowed to. Later on, during the rush hour, we had someone throw a milk crate down onto the tracks on the IRT at 14th Street at Union Square. I mean, these things happen, and the people are delayed because of it. And I'm not a happy person when that happens, because this wasn't a signal problem. This wasn't a track problem. This was, other people who, one individual can disrupt thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the morning. So look, I don't know how or can give you a specific time in which someone will be able to feel it, and what's different, but I'm looking at the actual number of delays, and and I'm looking at the actual incidents of the trains being slowed down, and they are different now. But they have to. It's the beginning. It's I'm not sure of the words you used, but it's a little better. And I don't think we're there yet. We're not, but it's a little better. I wanted to make that point because when you see, it's like getting a grade, and going home and saying, look, I did better than the last test, or we did better than last month, and next month we're going to do even better, and we'll continue to do better and better. I think, I set out goals to enhance reliability, and these are some of the indications for reliability. I'm sure you can go out and find people who will say interesting things, some positive, some not. I'm a New Yorker. I'm fully aware we're a large city and we have lots of, we have 8.5 million people thereabouts and about 8.5 million opinions.
Hi, Chairman. Can you discuss the issues you've been having with the R179 subway cars that are currently being tested, and then also kind of elaborate and clarify what role they'll have in boosting service during the L train shutdown, if any?
So the R179, my biggest issue with them is that they're 2 years late. And it's conversations that I've had with Bombardier and will be having with Bombardier later this week. But I mean, that's the biggest problem. During some of the testing phase, some things have worked, some things have not worked. It's not inconsistent with other new trains that we've received in the past. There's not more problems than there are in the past. That things need to get worked out. Where they worked in the factory and now that they work online, those things get worked out. It's absolutely consistent with what's happened in the past. But my problem is, the fact is we're 2 months late, and in fact we do get, there are penalties for that, and we receive, they pay a penalty for that. But to me, the most important thing is we expected these cars 2 years ago. I need the cars. The more cars we have, the better off it's going to be for all of our customers. And so for me, the penalties that they pay don't help the customer. What I want are the cars, and I want them working.
Chairman, I just want to ask you a little bit about, in the wake of the terrorist attack the other day, are there going to be any changes to the type of security that there is on either on the subway or on the commuter rails or on the buses to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again?
Well, there's been enhanced security, and every time there's some form of event, we evaluate it. We have after-action reports. We determine, what's the best way to deploy and redeploy our resources. We did enhance on the commuter rails almost immediately. Just so you know, it was about 7:21 in the morning, at which point the chief of department kept the MTA police who were on duty, were about to go off duty. They kept them on, so that we really had a double complement at the same point in time, which is a very, and that happened automatically because that's what we would do in any kind of a scenario. There has been an increased presence. I mean, I've heard it from many people that they've seen more. They've seen more officers in uniform walking around, not just being stationary in the various different locations. So all of that will go on. I mean, the situation with this situation was one in which, when we saw him getting on the F train out in Brooklyn, we saw him transfer. There was nothing untoward. There was no see something, say something moment. But I can't encourage enough for anybody who, and the reason why before I came in, they were showing some of the public service commercials that we have about see something, say something here, is because how important that is. And important it is for everybody. If you see something, say something. And it does not necessarily in the subway system. If you go home to your apartment building and you see a package in the hallway, tell somebody. It shouldn't be in the hallway. Don't just walk over it. Just say something. Because that's what we need to do in the environment in which we live.
Mr. Chairman, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the decision regarding the 53rd Street tunnel, shutting it down for a week rather than spreading that work out. What do you want strap hangers to keep in mind as that's going on? And if it works as well there as you anticipate that it will, is it something that could be applied to other parts of the system as you work to fix it?
No, let's throw the map out for a second. I think it's a unique opportunity. We have, one, significantly less riders during the week between Christmas and New Year's than we normally do. And the number in the mornings is down 45% less in the morning commutes on this line And so it's really important. We want to take advantage of an opportunity to go in and do a significant amount of work between Christmas and New Year's. But more importantly, there's a lot of, the lines that go through here where it's going to be impacted. There's an enormous amount of redundancy, meaning we're going to be able to reroute some of the trains on other lines. We're also going to be able to make sure that, for people will be able to get about. There's one station that won't have service, 53rd and 5th. But there is within one block one way, one block another way, another train that comes from the same area in Queens that will be able to get you to your location. So this is a unique opportunity because of the redundancy that's built into the system and how it all comes about, to be able to get the tunnel in much better shape. And instead of, we do have a lot of folks working on the weekends. I'm affected by the 2 and the 3 and the Clark Street Tunnel. It's not available for me on the weekends and for quite some time because of the amount of work that's being done. This is an opportunity to get, in that 4 or 5 day period, 5 or 6, 7 weekends, just make it happen. And it's the right thing to do. We have the workers, and we're going to be able to take advantage of them in a very intense way. About 400 workers will be in the tunnel, as I understand it. 400 workers, 400 to 500 workers will be in the tunnel almost on a 24-hour period during that 5 to 6 day stretch. So there may be. Let's consider this as a pilot to see what we can get done. As we've been doing, it started 5, 6 years ago with Fast Track, where we started shutting down at 11 o'clock at night till 5 o'clock in the morning to provide intensity into the work that needs to be done in the systems. This is just a continuation of that. I might add, as I responded to some folks who think it might be a good idea to shut the subway system down at night all the time, it's not. You can do this and do this very selectively in a dynamic way instead of a unilateral, let's not provide any service during, midnight to 5 o'clock in the morning. As I said then, and I'll say over and over again, the city that never sleeps needs a subway system that's always open.
Hi. Much of the debate today was about budgets, finances. I was just wondering, setting aside this political debate between the state and the city over the funding towards the Subway Action Plan, there are signs of an economic slowdown in the city. The federal tax reform plan could hurt the region. I was just wondering, as the person who looks closely at these budgets and thinks about these things all the time, how optimistic do you feel about the MTA's finances over the next 1, 2, 3 years going forward, given the rate of expansion on the capital side, the additional cost from the Subway Action Plan, and a possible contraction in the city's and the region's economy?
Well, the amount of capital, three issues you talked about, but the capital construction that's going on is no greater than what was put forward a couple of years ago. So there's not necessarily been an expansion. Look, as someone who's had to deal with budgets for quite a long period of time at the governmental level, specifically at the City of New York, the words optimism and pessimism never really apply, because you really want to be as nimble as possible to be able to react to both positive or negative news. It can happen at almost any time, and you need to have contingencies ready for that. And so, in the general question the general point of your question, I think, Paul, was, am I worried about what's going on in the world? Look, my very nature is that you need to be prepared. Is that a function of being worried, or is that just a function of good management? I think it's more in the terms of good management. You need to be prepared. Things go up, things go down. You need to be prepared to react to it and not have to worry about and say, geez, what do I do now? That's not an option when you run a place like this and you have customers that we need to serve day in and day out. Look, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of scenarios of people talking doomsday. They've been talking about it for a long time. The economy still keeps to be expanding, and more people seem to be having jobs. Look, the last thing in the world I want to do is to fall in line with economic prognostication. Get me 12 different economists, I'll get you 12 different points of view.
Thanks. So congratulations on the good news about improvement. Nice work.
But I wanted to know, you said sort of abstractly that you had goals set. How close are you to meeting the goals? What are the goals for these various criteria? I mean, it is improvement, but is this incremental towards what you want? Are you halfway there, a tenth? Could you put it in as context?
Yeah, it's really interesting. What's different now, there's a couple of things, and the thing that I look at that's somewhat abstract are, as was mentioned earlier, that you could go out and talk to the person on the street and ask them how they feel about what's going on in the subway system. There was an article, I believe, written over here by the Post about what people's thoughts are about. I think it was the L-train. It might have been your story about the L-train collision. You had two quotes, or about what's going on in this train here. First person who said, the MTA is not MIT. Yeah, I agree with that. But also, who was the guy that came up with this idea to do that? Then the next person you interviewed, maybe it wasn't in that order, but it was the way you wrote it, was they thought it was a really good idea. I mean, that goes to the nature of talking to New Yorkers. You get different points of view. So part of the abstract numbers, in my mind, is to be able to start to see less and less negative comments. I don't expect to see positive comments. That's not what we do as New Yorkers. But I'd like to see, in addition to seeing delays going down and the amount of throughput, the number of trains we put through a station in the rush hour or at any given hour, but specifically in the peaks, going up with less delays. To me, that's the important part of it. And as well with the communication, we're getting lots of good feedback from the public about how we're communicating. We're communicating with very straightforward, direct language about what's going on. Instead of generic, we're stopped because of police action, without ever really seeing what's going on. And we had a debate the other day, how do we describe a terrorist act? I mean, there's over, and we went through, but it was pretty straightforward, and we basically talked that there was an event that was happening and that we were rerouting this train and rerouting that train. And so that was part of it. But in answer to your question, is there a specific number? No, it's a combination of both. Seeing the reduction, but also seeing the reaction of most New Yorkers who feel satisfied in some way, shape, or form.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. I would like to know, after the incident on 42nd Street on Times Square, beside the presence of NYPD officers, what specifically MTA employees are going to do? Maybe are you planning to train in more about safety, or what kind of actions MTA employees are going to put in place?
I think that the training will continue. This was a situation where someone walking down a hallway decided to blow up a pipe bomb. I think the most important thing is the employees helped everyone get out of the terminal of the station at that time. And they will continue to do that. And this is not something that we haven't trained for. This was not this was a single person, as it's been described in the press as a lone wolf situation. And I think the reaction on our part of the workers is such that they successfully got everyone out, and they were successfully, each and every one of them was safe. As we do various different tabletop exercises, understanding what could happen in various different types of, we do change our protocols internally. We do make certain changes, and we don't talk about it publicly because there's really no value in it. But we're constantly evaluating what it is we need to do to protect the system, protect our workers, protect our customers. And I think I just did that in inverse order. It's the customers first, our workers, and then the system.
Getting back to the finances for a minute, one of the primary talking points the last couple of days is uncertainty out of Washington and Albany. And I'm just wondering, do you think Albany is ready for a serious discussion on congestion pricing, and what's your own personal take on how that might benefit mass transit funding, not just for the MTA, but for the other agencies in the region?
I understand the need, why people were talking about because of our budget proposal today. There was, their concern. I heard things that, not today, but the other day, that it's the worst they've seen, and I mean, a little hyperbolic, but nonetheless, I actually believe, in answer to that, is that, as I said before, Paul, we need to be prepared. Things go up and things go down. We can't be surprised by any of that. But when it comes to congestion pricing, I do think a proposal will be put forward on congestion pricing by the committee. I'm not a member of that committee, so I don't know exactly where they are, but I do know that I understand they're prepared, or may have even, they're making a presentation about what is recommended. I think we'll fully hear the governor talk about it sometime in January. And then that begins the debate within the legislature as to what we can do. Do I think congestion pricing is needed? Do I think congestion pricing is necessary? The question is absolutely. No different than I felt many years ago when they put forward congestion pricing. There's been congestion pricing in various different parts of the world. It has worked. What is important for me, though, because inherent in congestion pricing is less people driving into the central business district, more people taking the subway into the central business district. So we got to get that subway system into its best possible shape as we can. Congestion pricing, I will tell you, does take time to implement. It's not something where you just say, let's do it. It takes time to implement. You know, there are, whatever needs to be done mechanically or digitally to check the cars to make sure who gets charged, who doesn't, and all the rules and all that stuff. So, that's also part of what needs to happen and will happen in 2018. I think there are other revenue-related items that people are talking about within the legislature in Albany. I'll leave that up to state legislators to talk to you about as ways in which can help the MTA. But as you heard at the board meeting today, the one thing we at the board all agreed on today was that the need for additional revenue for the MTA. And the other thing that was said was that any additional revenue should go to both operating, to minimize any fare and toll increases in the future, and to capital. So I think we have to look at it in both ways. Thanks.
Hello, Chairman. Do you think there's any fear, and do you have maybe any fear of a mixed message that we have money, we need money? We're working on this, but there's still a lot for us to be able to do. The back and forth that went on here, do you think that maybe riders will be confused by the means, by the idea of what's supposed to happen here?
Right. So Greg, I missed the part where you described up front, we have money versus... Oh, you're asking me to put myself in their shoes. That's not what I believe, but, with somebody's shoes. Right. Look, look, the subway action plan that's developed in June and July is a surge, meaning a surge of the amount of work to get the system back in a better state of repair, to get it into a state of reliability, reduction in the number of delays. The way I envisioned it up front was 50-50 between city and state. We have a commitment for 50% from the state. We don't have it from the city. I fully understand that. But I also, from a fiduciary responsibility, can't spend money I don't have. I'm not going to put us into that situation, operating dollars that I have. So what I've been able to do with the money I do have is to be able to stretch it out over a longer period of time. However, what I also said today, which I think was different from what I said before, is that we evaluate the Subway Action Program almost every single day. And there are things in the Subway Action Program today that didn't exist when we developed the Subway Action Program back in late June and into July. It didn't exist because of, and one example was, what we found about cleaning the drains. I mean, we did not realize how bad the situation was and the lack of cleaning. So, look, the Subway Action Plan is dynamic. We do know what we need to do to get the system to be more reliable. And we're doing it every day, and we're changing it around. Part of this closure here for the weekend, I mean, this was not envisioned at the time. This is clearly part of the Subway Action Plan. But we then saw an opportunity to get a lot of intense work done during the lowest period of the year when there were much less riders on here, and also to be able to reroute some of the lines. And also, I might add, some people take some of the lines and take it out to Jamaica so they can change to the air train. I mean, we've given a route in specific directions on how they can continue to do that. The long and the short of it is, Today's debate, as former Board President Freddie Ferrer talked about, was more of politics covered under the cloak of policy debate, and it is what it is. The Subway Action Plan is, regardless of how they think it should be funded, nobody said we shouldn't do the Subway Action Plan. They're all for it. I wish they were all for it, dollars and cents as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is about a specific element of the Subway Action Plan, the placement of EMTs into subways. Now, you said, the acting president said in the board meeting that there are 8 stations, but there were 12 stations announced that they were going to be placed in. So who's running the implementation of that program, and when do you think it's going to be fully implemented?
Bill Lang should answer.
No, you are correct. I had mistaken when I had said 8. There's 12 EMTs across the system, so that is the intent.
That's 12, just 12 technicians only in the system?
Right.
Okay.
Strategically placed in, and we have seen an increase in response time, which ends up in a good impact, being able to get sick customers off the train and onto the platform, and then, if necessary, into an ambulance.
Mr. Chairman, we understand that the L train detail, the shutdown of the L train is going to be probably, details of it will be released later. But do you expect strap hangers to be satisfied, to be upset? When you look at the inconveniences that will be caused and whatever you've tried to do to ameliorate that, but tell us about it.
If you recall, when we had the hearings, I wasn't here at the time, but I did see the hearings and showed the community the current condition of the tunnel, realizing that something has to happen because of the safety within that tunnel, the Canarsie Line tunnel. They're all accepted. And the community, we're given options. Do we do it over a weekend for a longer period of time, or do we do it on a concentrated basis? And overall, they thought doing it on a concentrated basis is the right thing to do. Do what you need to do, and let's make sure that the system is as safe as possible, and fix the problems that came about from the water that came into the tunnel from Superstorm Sandy. That said, the proposal that will be given out and discussed later today, which is a joint effort between the MTA and the City Department of Transportation, will be done elaborately this afternoon and testified tomorrow before City Council, is a joint effort looking at everything that we heard from the community and being able to respond to those community needs. What will happen regarding additional buses, changes at stations, what do we do in Manhattan on 14th Street, can we get a ferry? All this is going to be developed and laid out this afternoon. Ronnie Hakem, Commissioner Trottenberg, will go through that in great detail. As Polly mentioned earlier at the board meeting, in spite of the discussion that happened today, we are working together on this, and we're doing it from the point of view of making sure that the people it's not just Williamsburg, it's all the way down from the Canarsie, down where it begins, the line begins in Canarsie all the way forward, who are going to be impacted by this. We're also having additional trains. Some of the people coming in from the south will be able to connect to other lines, and we're encouraging that. We're going to put more trains on, more frequency of trains. So this is going to be a large, dynamic program. And we learned from what happened with Long Island Railroad this past summer. What I think is important, what became an abundance of caution turned into abundance of choice. We're going to do the same thing here. We want to provide the people who are going to be impacted by this opportunities for multiple ways in which they can go to or from Manhattan with the tunnel being shut down. Daily News. I have a final word.
How's it going? 2 questions, one on the budget and one on the R179 cars. On the budget, what is, maybe if you talked about this, I'm sorry if I missed it, but what exactly in the plan gets stretched out? What is this stretching? And for the R179 cars, you were chairman of the board back in 2012 when Bombardier got the contract. It was talking to transit officials. It was all things being equal. They had the lower bid, and there was confidence they can do it, so they got the contract, and they didn't. Even though the runner-up bidder did try to warn. So I just want to ask, what lessons are you taking from that procurement going into the R211 procurement, and how much is price going to still be a factor in this?
So, two questions. First part is, doing things slower because we don't have the resources to be able to go in there. I mean, instead of fixing, I'll just use a very, very simple example. Instead of fixing one switch, we may have to, in that same period of time, we're going to, be able to fix 3/4 of a switch. It's just about stretching out a little bit of period of time. Remember, I never discussed the time frame with the public. So for me, it's a stretch out because I won't be able to have the money to be able to do it. For me, it's I'd like to get this subway action plan done over to a point where people are satisfied and we can get to the next level, which is the modernization of the New York City subway system. I need to get it stabilized before we get to the next level. I didn't say then, I'm not going to say now. I need to get there as fast as possible because the people of New York want a modernization of their system. People of New York deserve a modernization of their subway system. I need to get it stabilized. I need to get, as was Andrew brought up, the public, when are they going to see a difference? I want to get there as fast as possible overall. Look, lessons learned from, right. I'm not, he asked about the older one, not the new one. Right, the R179. I'm not going to talk about any new procurements. Don't worry about it. It's a violation. No. But what I learned, look, you always learn from what you've done in the past. If you don't and you continue to do things differently, it's not a teaching moment. Look, there's no doubt. I didn't keep notes from when we made that selection, but there are a lot of people who thought that the selection was done properly to the proper person. Obviously, the person losing the bid, the people losing the bid, didn't think that. But the situation right now with Bombardier is such that we're not the only transit agency that has had seen failure to deliver by the date expected. And so that's become a bigger and bigger point as we go through all types of RFPs, all types of acquisitions, as to whether or not the vendor can do what the vendor says they're going to do. That's an important thing. You got to drill down on it. It requires significant due diligence, and we will continue to do that. I hope to never have a situation like that again. As I said before, in spite of the fact that there are penalties for being late, it doesn't satisfy me that penalties are being charged to them because they're not late. It bothers me because we don't have these new cars for the customers. Thanks, everybody. Have a happy holiday, everybody.